The champagne glasses were raised. 300 guests stood in their designer gowns and tailored suits. The bride, radiant in Vera Wang, smiled at the altar, waiting for the man she'd loved for 4 years to complete his vows. That's when Billionaire CEO Everett Hale's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Just a glance. 2 seconds, maybe 3. The color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. "I'm sorry," he said into the microphone. Not to his bride, to everyone. "I have to go." He walked straight down that aisle, past his crying fiancée Clarissa Monroe, past his horrified mother, past the stunned photographer who kept clicking because she didn't know what else to do, and he disappeared through the cathedral doors. The wedding of the decade ended before it began. No explanation, no goodbye. Just the echo of Italian leather shoes on marble floors, and Clarissa left, standing alone with a bouquet of white peonies trembling in her hands. News outlets went wild within the hour. Social media exploded with theories. Hale Industries stock dropped 8% by Monday morning. But nobody, not the journalists, not the business analysts, not even his own family, knew the truth about that phone call. A 5-year-old girl was dying in a hospital room across the city, and Everett Hale was her father, a secret he'd buried so deep he'd almost convinced himself it never happened. A child from a brief relationship with a woman named Nadia Brooks, a woman who'd vanished from his life when he was still just an ambitious junior executive with empty pockets and big dreams. She never told him about the pregnancy. He never asked where she went. 5 years of silence. 5 years of him building an empire while somewhere out there, a little girl grew up without knowing his name, until leukemia forced Nadia to make a choice she'd avoided for half a decade. She called the man who never knew he was a father. She called him on his wedding day because she had no other options left, because their daughter needed a bone marrow transplant, and he might be the only match. One phone call, one impossible choice, one moment that would reshape every relationship Everett Hale had ever known. Have you ever had your past show up at the worst possible moment? That phone call you weren't expecting. That face in the crowd you hoped you'd never see again. That secret you thought was safely locked away, suddenly demanding to be acknowledged in front of everyone who matters. We've all been there in some form. Maybe not at our own wedding. Maybe not with millions of dollars and a corporate empire hanging in the balance. But we know that feeling. That cold sweat. That moment when 2 worlds you've kept carefully separated come crashing together. What would you do if one decision could change multiple lives forever? Not just your life. The life of the woman waiting at the altar who trusted you completely. The life of a child you never knew existed. The life of a woman from your past who swallowed her pride to reach out because her daughter's survival depended on it. There's no clean answer. No choice that doesn't leave someone shattered. Everett Hale had exactly 30 seconds to make that decision. 30 seconds between reading Nadia Brooks's message and choosing to walk away from the woman he was about to marry. Some people called him a monster for what he did to Clarissa Monroe that day. Others would later call him a hero for what he did next. But here's the question that haunted everyone who witnessed that wedding disaster. Did he make the right choice? Or did he simply trade one tragedy for another? The answer isn't as simple as you might think, because this story isn't really about a ruined wedding or a sick child or a secret kept too long. It's about what happens when the person you've become has to face the person you used to be, and whether love, real love, can survive the collision. This story cuts straight to the bone of who we are when nobody's watching. Success versus love. Everett Hale spent 15 years building Hale Industries from a one-room startup into a billion-dollar empire. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every relationship he neglected. Along the way, it all led to this moment, the pinnacle of his personal and professional life. A wedding to Clarissa Monroe, daughter of one of the most influential families on the East Coast. A merger of hearts that also happened to be a merger of dynasties. Walking away from that altar didn't just break a woman's heart. It threatened everything he'd constructed. Board members questioning his judgment, investors wondering if their CEO had lost his mind. The Monroe family, powerful, connected, and now publicly humiliated, sharpening their knives. Success has a price, but so does love. And Everett was about to learn exactly how expensive both could be. Image versus responsibility. For years, Everett crafted his public persona with surgical precision. The self-made billionaire. The philanthropist. The man who turned failure into fortune through sheer determination. Magazine covers celebrated him. Business schools studied him. Young entrepreneurs idolized him. None of them knew about Nadia Brooks. None of them knew about the summer 6 years ago when he was broke, desperate, and falling for a woman who saw him before the money and the power. None of them knew how that relationship ended or what it produced. A child changes everything. A secret child that changes everything twice. Once when the secret exists, and again when it explodes into public view. Everett's carefully constructed image was about to meet a wrecking ball named truth. Past choices demanding accountability. Here's what nobody tells you about running from your past. It trains for marathons while you're standing still. 6 years ago, Everett made choices. Small ones that felt insignificant at the time. He didn't fight harder when Nadia pulled away. He didn't ask enough questions when she stopped returning calls. He let her disappear because chasing her meant confronting feelings he wasn't ready to face. He chose ambition over answers. Now those choices had compounded with interest. A little girl named Zoe had spent 5 years without a father. Nadia had spent 5 years carrying the weight alone. And Clarissa had spent 4 years loving a man who was keeping a piece of himself locked away, even if he didn't fully realize it. The past doesn't forget. It waits. And when it finally presents the bill, the amount is always more than you expected. 3 conflicts, 3 impossible tensions, and one man standing at the center of all of them. The wedding was just the beginning. So now the questions start piling up, the ones that keep you watching, the ones that don't let you look away. Why did he really walk away? Was it purely about saving his daughter's life? Or was there something else pulling Everett Hale toward that hospital room? Something he'd never admitted to himself during those 4 years with Clarissa Monroe? When Nadia Brooks's name flashed across his phone screen, what did he feel in that split second before logic kicked in? Relief? Terror? Or something far more complicated? Something that had been sleeping quietly beneath the surface of his perfect life? A man doesn't abandon his wedding for obligation alone. There has to be more. And there was. So much more. What secret had been hidden for years? Nadia didn't just disappear 6 years ago. She vanished with surgical precision, changed her phone number, moved cities, deleted every digital trace of their connection. Why would a woman go to such extreme lengths to hide from a man she once loved? The answer to that question reveals a truth far more devastating than a secret pregnancy. It exposes lies told by people Everett trusted completely. It uncovers betrayals orchestrated by those closest to him. And it forces him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about why Nadia left. She didn't abandon him. She was driven away. Could Clarissa ever forgive what happened? She stood at that altar in front of everyone she knew. Her family, her friends, her colleagues, society photographers capturing every excruciating second. Public humiliation doesn't wash off easily. Neither does private heartbreak. But Clarissa Monroe wasn't just any woman. She came from a family that understood power, strategy, and patience. She didn't crumble at that altar. She watched Everett leave with dry eyes and a steady spine. Some people mistook that composure for shock. They were wrong. Clarissa was already planning her next move, and it would shake Everett Hale's world far more than any phone call ever could. Can love survive when trust is shattered? Not just romantic love, all of it. The love between a mother and the child she's fighting to save. The love between a father and a daughter meeting for the first time. The love between 2 people who never stopped caring about each other, even when years and silence and circumstances built walls between them. This story will test every definition of love you thought you understood, and by the end, you'll have to decide for yourself who deserves forgiveness, who deserves blame, and whether some damage can ever truly be repaired. Before we go any further, let me take a moment to welcome you. If you're new here, thank you for clicking. Thank you for giving this story a chance. You're about to experience something different, not just entertainment, but a journey that will make you think, feel, and maybe even question some of your own choices along the way. If you're returning, welcome back. You already know what we do here. We don't tell shallow stories. We go deep. We explore the messy, complicated, beautifully flawed nature of human beings. And we always leave you with something to carry into your own life. Here's what I'm asking from you today. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button and join this community of people who crave stories with substance. Stories that don't insult your intelligence. Stories that respect your time by delivering real meaning alongside real drama. We release new long-form stories regularly, each one carefully crafted to take you on an emotional journey worth remembering. But more importantly, I need you to stay until the very end of this one. Not because I want to boost watch time, not because algorithms reward retention, but because the life lesson embedded in this story doesn't reveal itself until the final moments. Everything you're about to witness, the heartbreak, the secrets, the betrayals, the impossible choices, it all builds towards something profound, something that might genuinely change how you approach your own relationships, your own past, and your own definition of redemption. Everett Hale's story isn't just about a billionaire who ruined his wedding. It's about the price of silence, the cost of running, and the terrifying, beautiful possibility of starting over when everything seems destroyed beyond repair. So settle in, get comfortable, turn off distractions if you can. This is going to be an emotional ride. There will be moments that make you angry, moments that break your heart, moments that surprise you completely. And when we reach the end together, I promise you'll understand why this story needed to be told. Now, let's go back to the beginning, back to a time before the empire, before the wedding, before the secrets. Let's go back to the moment Everett Hale first met Nadia Brooks. St. Augustine Cathedral had witnessed 3 centuries of marriages, funerals, and prayers whispered into its vaulted ceilings. Today, it would witness something no one expected. Morning light poured through stained glass windows that stretched 40 feet toward heaven. Each panel told a story: saints and sinners, redemption and fall, love and sacrifice. The colors splashed across marble floors in pools of crimson, gold, and deep violet. Dust motes floated through those colored beams like tiny witnesses suspended in time. The scent of 10,000 white roses saturated the air. Clarissa Monroe had insisted on roses. Not just any roses, New Zealand white garden roses flown in specifically for this occasion. They cascaded from every pew end. They draped across the altar in elegant waves. They climbed stone columns in carefully engineered arrangements that took a team of 12 florists 14 hours to complete. The fragrance should have been romantic. Instead, it felt almost suffocating. Too sweet, too heavy. The kind of perfume that masked something underneath. Candles flickered in iron sconces along the walls, 300 of them, each one hand-lit by cathedral staff beginning at dawn. Their flames created dancing shadows that moved across ancient stone like restless spirits. The effect was meant to evoke timeless romance, old Hollywood glamour meeting sacred tradition. But fire is unpredictable. It wavers, it gutters, it dies without warning. Organ music swelled from pipes hidden in the cathedral's upper reaches. Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, filled the cavernous space with notes that had accompanied countless brides down countless aisles. The organist, a man who had played for 2 presidential weddings, pressed keys that had been pressed for generations. Everything about this setting screamed permanence, history, tradition. The vaulted ceilings soared overhead like clasped hands pointing toward God. Gothic arches repeated themselves in perfect symmetry down the nave. Stone walls 3 feet thick had stood since before America was a nation. This was a place built to last forever, which made it the perfect setting for vows meant to do the same, or the cruelest possible backdrop for those vows to shatter. The altar itself commanded attention from every angle. Hand-carved mahogany aged to a deep burgundy sheen. A white silk runner stretched before it like a path of surrender. 2 chairs waited, ornate, cushioned, positioned for the bride and groom during the ceremony's longer prayers. Above the altar hung a crucifix that had survived 2 fires, 1 earthquake, and a Revolutionary War. Christ's bronze face looked down with an expression artists had debated for decades. Some saw peace in those eyes. Others saw warning. Outside the cathedral, chaos wore a civilized mask. 14 satellite trucks lined the street in a neat row. Reporters from every major network stood before cameras, microphones, ready, repeating variations of the same breathless introduction. The wedding of the year is about to begin here at historic St. Augustine Cathedral, where billionaire CEO Everett Hale will marry Clarissa Monroe, heiress to the Monroe shipping dynasty. Helicopters circled overhead despite the no-fly zone requests. Paparazzi with telephoto lenses had rented apartments in buildings 3 blocks away. Drone operators tested the limits of legality and decency, trying to capture any angle the official photographers might miss. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a media event, a cultural moment, a merger disguised as a love story. The guest list read like a Fortune 500 directory crossed with a Society page Hall of Fame. Tech billionaires occupied pews beside old money aristocrats. Hollywood A-listers sat near politicians whose campaign funds bore Hale's fingerprints. Fashion designers assessed each other's work with competitive eyes while pretending to admire the floral arrangements. 300 guests. Combined net worth exceeding $40 billion. Enough influence in those wooden pews to reshape industries, swing elections, or destroy careers with a single coordinated whisper. They had all cleared their schedules, flown in from Tokyo, London, Dubai, and Sao Paulo, rearranged board meetings and film shoots and diplomatic summits. For Everett Hale, they made time, because Everett Hale was the man of the moment, the self-made billionaire who had turned a struggling software company into a global technology empire, the philanthropist who built schools in developing nations and funded cancer research with personal checks, the bachelor who had finally chosen a bride worthy of his meteoric rise. Magazines had dedicated entire issues to this romance. Business journals analyzed the strategic implications of uniting Hale Industries with Monroe shipping interests. Gossip columns tracked every date, every vacation, every public kiss. The expectations were crushing. Clarissa's mother, Victoria Monroe, had spent 18 months planning this ceremony. Every detail vetted, every vendor interrogated, every possible mishap anticipated and neutralized with military precision. The cake alone had required 3 months of tastings, design revisions, and structural engineering consultations. 7 tiers. Fondant imported from Belgium. Sugar flowers so realistic that guests would later swear they smelled like actual blooms. Clarissa's dress had been featured in Vogue before she even wore it. A custom creation from a designer who typically clothed European royalty. Hand-sewn crystals. Antique lace from her great-grandmother's wedding gown incorporated into the bodice. A train that required 4 attendants to manage. Nothing had been left to chance, except the one thing no amount of planning could control: the human heart. Security personnel in discreet black suits monitored every entrance. Earpieces crackled with updates about guest arrivals and perimeter status. The Monroe family had insisted on private security supplementing the cathedral's standard arrangements. 17 additional guards. Background checks on every vendor, musician, and florist. They were prepared for gate crashers, for protesters, for overzealous fans. They were not prepared for a phone call. In the front pew, Everett's mother Eleanor sat with practiced elegance. Her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon, her Chanel suit selected to complement but never compete with the bride's palette, her expression composed into the serene smile she had worn through decades of society events. But her eyes kept drifting to the side door, watching for her son, waiting for him to emerge and take his position at the altar. He was late, only by minutes, but Eleanor Hale had raised her son to be precisely punctual. Lateness was weakness, she had taught him. Lateness was disrespect. So where was he? The organ music cycled through its pre-ceremony repertoire for the 3rd time. Guests shifted in their seats. Whispered conversations grew slightly louder. The photographers checked their equipment. The videographers confirmed their angles. The social media coordinator, yes, there was a social media coordinator, prepared to send the first authorized post the moment vows were exchanged. Everything was ready. Everyone was waiting. The world was watching. Everett Hale stood in the cathedral's antechamber, staring at a mirror that showed a stranger. The man in the reflection wore a Tom Ford tuxedo tailored to mathematical perfection, shoulders squared, lapels sharp enough to cut, a silk bow tie in deep navy that matched the exact shade of his eyes. He looked like a man who had everything. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. His hands wouldn't stop trembling. Small vibrations he'd been hiding all morning. He pressed his palms flat against a cold marble counter, willing the shaking to stop. It didn't. This was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. The culmination of 4 years with Clarissa. The beginning of a future they had planned together in exhaustive detail. Children within 2 years. A house in the Hamptons. Philanthropic initiatives they would share as a power couple. It was all mapped out. So why did his chest feel like someone had wrapped iron bands around it? Everett loosened his bow tie, then tightened it again, then loosened it. His best man, Derek Sullivan, watched this ritual with growing concern. "You okay, man?" "Fine." The word came out too quickly. "Just processing. Cold feet are normal. Everyone gets them. But this wasn't cold feet." Cold feet implied uncertainty about the decision, doubt about the person waiting at the altar. Everett had no doubt about Clarissa. She was perfect for him. Intelligent, ambitious, connected, beautiful in that polished way that photographed well and aged gracefully. She understood his world because she came from a similar one. She didn't need his money, which meant he never had to wonder about her motives. On paper, they were the ideal match. So why couldn't he breathe? His phone sat on the counter beside the sink, silent, dark. But he kept glancing at it like it might suddenly come alive, waiting for something. He didn't know what. 5 minutes, Derek said, checking his watch. We should head out there. Everett nodded, but didn't move. In the mirror, he watched his own jaw clench, watched his eyes search for something he couldn't name, watched his hands finally still, not from calm but from a sudden, inexplicable numbness. He had built a billion-dollar company on instinct, on trusting his gut when everyone else followed spreadsheets and projections. That instinct had made him wealthy beyond imagination. That same instinct was screaming at him now. Something is wrong. Not with Clarissa. Not with the wedding. Not with any detail he could point to and fix. Something deeper. Something buried. Something he had refused to excavate for years, because excavating meant facing truths he preferred to leave underground. A name flickered through his mind. Uninvited. Unwelcome. Nadia. He crushed the thought immediately. Locked it back in the mental vault where he'd kept it for 6 years. That chapter was closed. That story was over. Whatever they'd had, whatever he'd felt, belonged to a different version of himself. A broke version. A scared version. A version who hadn't yet learned to build walls high enough to keep the past where it belonged. He was Everett Hale now. CEO. Billionaire. Philanthropist. Not the desperate young man who had loved a woman he couldn't afford to keep. Everett. Derek's voice carried an edge of urgency. Seriously. We need to go. Everett straightened his bow tie one final time, pulled his shoulders back, arranged his face into the confident expression that had graced magazine covers and investor presentations. The mask fit perfectly. It always did. Let's do this, he said. But as he walked toward the door that would lead him to the altar, his hand brushed against his phone. And some part of him, the part he refused to acknowledge, hoped it would ring. The processional music shifted. Pachelbel's cannon began its familiar descent. Everett stood at the altar, hands clasped in front of him, watching the cathedral doors at the far end of the aisle. Bridesmaids in dusty rose gowns made their measured walk. Groomsmen followed. Flower girls scattered petals with practiced precision. Every movement choreographed, every second timed. But Everett's mind kept slipping. He noticed things he shouldn't be noticing. Not on his wedding day. Not in this moment. The way the candlelight caught dust particles floating near the third pew. The slight wobble in one bridesmaid's heel. A guest in the back row stifling a cough. The organist's almost imperceptible pause between musical phrases. Details that didn't matter. Details his brain was using to avoid the larger picture. Clarissa's mother Victoria sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than most people's car payments. But her tears looked rehearsed. Her grief performative, like she was already imagining how this footage would play in the documentary someone would inevitably make about the wedding. His own mother's smile hadn't wavered in 45 minutes. Fixed. Frozen. The smile of a woman who had learned long ago that public appearances mattered more than private feelings. Had anyone here ever felt something genuine? Or was this entire cathedral filled with people performing emotions they thought they should have? The question troubled him more than it should. Clarissa appeared in the doorway. A collective gasp rose from the guests. Genuine for once. She was stunning. The dress, the veil, the way afternoon light caught the crystals and scattered tiny rainbows across her face. She smiled at him from across that long aisle, and Everett felt nothing. No, that wasn't true. He felt something, but it wasn't the overwhelming love that was supposed to crash over a groom seeing his bride. It wasn't the certainty that songs described and movies depicted. It was recognition, appreciation, affection even. But beneath it all, a hollowness he couldn't explain. Clarissa began her walk. Step, pause, step, pause. The rhythm they'd practiced at rehearsal. Her father Malcolm walked beside her, chin high, chest puffed with pride, at delivering his daughter to the most eligible bachelor in America. Everett watched her approach and tried to feel what he was supposed to feel. Love her, He commanded himself. Feel it. Show it. Be present. Instead, his mind wandered to a different woman walking toward him. 6 years ago, a beach at sunset. No designer dress, no choreographed steps, just bare feet on sand and a laugh that made him forget he was failing at everything else in his life. Nadia had worn a yellow sundress that day. Cheap cotton, slightly faded, more beautiful than any couture gown could ever be because of who was wearing it. She had walked toward him without rehearsal, without an audience, without any plan beyond wanting to be close to him, and he had felt everything. Stop. Stop it now. Everett blinked hard, forced the memory back into its cage, focused on Clarissa, now halfway down the aisle, still smiling that perfect smile. She deserved better than a groom lost in memories of another woman. He owed her his full presence, his complete commitment. Whatever he once felt for Nadia Brooks was ancient history, dead and buried, irrelevant. But ghosts don't care about burial. They rise when they're ready. And somewhere across the city, in a hospital room Everett didn't know existed, a ghost was preparing to make her call. Clarissa reached the altar. Her father placed her hand in Everett's. The minister began speaking words that had been spoken millions of times before. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Everett held Clarissa's hand. It was warm, soft, familiar, but not the hand he kept remembering. The altar demanded surrender. Everett understood this now, standing before it with Clarissa's fingers intertwined with his own. An altar wasn't just furniture. It wasn't just tradition. It was a threshold. On one side stood the person you were. On the other side waited the person you were agreeing to become. Once you crossed it, once you spoke those vows, there was no returning to who you'd been before. Every path not taken sealed itself shut. Every alternate future collapsed into impossibility. The altar was beautiful. Ancient mahogany polished to a deep glow, white flowers cascading across its surface, candles casting warm light across the minister's weathered face. But beauty didn't diminish its power. This was where choices became permanent, where maybe transformed into forever, where the door behind you locked and the key dissolved. Everett thought about all the decisions that had led him here. The decision to take a risk on an untested technology that became the foundation of Hale Industries. The decision to work 20-hour days while his peers chased pleasure. The decision to sacrifice relationships on the altar of ambition. The decision to let Nadia Brooks walk away without fighting for her. That last one didn't belong here. Not now. Not at this altar. But the mind is a traitor. Its surface is what we bury precisely when we need to focus on what's in front of us. Clarissa squeezed his hand. A gentle pressure. A silent question. Are you with me? He squeezed back. Smiled at her with all the warmth he could summon. I'm here. I'm present. I'm yours. But his heart kept its secrets. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about patience and kindness, about two lives becoming one. The words washed over Everett like water over stone, touching the surface, leaving the depths undisturbed. He watched Clarissa's face as she listened, her eyes shining, her lips slightly parted, her expression one of complete, uncomplicated joy. She had no doubts, no hidden chambers in her heart where old loves still lingered. She was giving herself to him fully, without reservation, without ghosts haunting the edges of her happiness. And he was giving her, what, exactly? His name, his wealth, his public commitment. But his whole heart. Could you give what you didn't fully possess? The ceremony continued. Scripture readings, musical interludes, a homily about the sacred bond of matrimony. Everything looks perfect. The thought arrived unbidden, an observation from somewhere outside himself. The flowers were perfect. The music was perfect. The venue, the guests, the dress, the weather, all perfect. Clarissa was perfect. And yet, something feels wrong. Everett couldn't name it. Couldn't point to a single element that justified this creeping sense of unease. By every objective measure, this was the culmination of his dreams. The happy ending the media would celebrate. The fairy tale conclusion to his rags to riches story. So why did it feel like an ending rather than a beginning? Why did this altar, this beautiful historic altar where love was supposed to be sealed, feel more like a trap than a threshold? The minister turned to Everett, smiled the patient smile of a man who had guided countless couples through these words. The couple has chosen to recite traditional vows. Everett, please repeat after me. This was it. The moment of no return. Everett opened his mouth to speak, and that's when his phone vibrated. He ignored it. Of course he ignored it. No sane person answers their phone during their own wedding vows. It vibrated again, and again, and again. Insistent, urgent, relentless. Clarissa's smile faltered. Just a flicker, barely perceptible. The minister paused, cleared his throat. 300 guests held their breath. Everett's hand moved toward his pocket before his brain could stop it. Instinct overriding decorum. Something in those vibrations demanded attention in a way he couldn't explain. He pulled out the phone, glanced at the screen. One name, 4 letters, Nadia, and beneath it, a message that would shatter everything. She's your daughter. She's dying. Please come. The cathedral fell silent. The candles kept flickering. The altar waited, and Everett Hale's perfect life cracked straight down the middle. Everett Hale learned about money the hard way, by watching its absence destroy his family. He was 9 years old when the electricity got cut off for the first time. His mother lit candles and called it an adventure. His father sat in the darkness, head in hands, saying nothing. The silence was worse than any argument could have been. That silence taught Everett his first lesson about poverty. It doesn't just empty your wallet, it empties your spirit. His father, Richard Hale, had been a factory supervisor. Solid job. Union benefits. Enough to keep a family of 4 fed and sheltered in their small Ohio town. Then the plant closed. Then the next one. Then the next. By the time Everett turned 12, his father had cycled through 6 jobs. Each one paying less than the last. Each one chipping away at the man Richard used to be. His mother Eleanor held the family together through sheer force of will. She worked double shifts as a hotel housekeeper. Ironed her uniform at midnight so it would be crisp for the morning. Never complained. Never cried where her children could see. But Everett saw anyway. He saw the bills she hid in her dresser drawer. Saw the red ink. Saw the words "Final Notice" stamped across envelopes she thought she'd concealed. He saw her wedding ring disappear one winter when the heating bill came due. She never mentioned it. Neither did he. Some lessons don't require words. By 16, Everett had constructed his entire worldview around one central truth. Money was freedom. Without it, you were a leaf in the wind, blown wherever circumstances decided to take you. With it, you controlled your own direction. He became obsessed with success in a way his peers couldn't understand. While they chased parties and relationships, he chased grades and opportunities. While they dreamed about prom dates, he dreamed about escape. College came on a full scholarship, the only way it could have come. He chose business over his passion for literature because business built empires. Literature built nothing but beautiful thoughts that couldn't pay rent. He buried the poet inside himself, locked away the boy who once wrote stories by flashlight and dreamed of creating worlds with words. That boy was a luxury he couldn't afford. The businessman he was becoming. That man would never light candles because the power got cut. That man would never watch his wife sell her wedding ring. That man would never sit in darkness, defeated by forces beyond his control. That man would become the force, whatever it cost. The first 5 years after college nearly broke him. Everett graduated summa cum laude with a business degree and a fire in his belly that could have powered a small city. He had plans, strategies, a 5-year roadmap to his first million. Reality had other ideas. His first startup failed in 11 months. A tech platform that was ahead of its time, which meant no one understood it and no one invested in it. He watched his creation die slowly, unable to save it, unable to admit defeat until the bank account hit 0. The second venture lasted 8 months. A consulting firm that couldn't attract clients because Everett Hale was a nobody, with no connections and no track record. He pitched to empty rooms, sent proposals that disappeared into corporate black holes, knocked on doors that remained firmly closed. By 26, he had failed twice and accumulated $60,000 in debt. The fear was constant, a low hum beneath everything he did. Fear of proving his father right, that the world would chew you up regardless of how hard you worked. Fear of becoming another cautionary tale about ambition exceeding ability. Fear of the darkness waiting at the bottom of every risk. He took a job he hated, junior analyst at a mid-sized firm that treated him like furniture. 12-hour days reviewing spreadsheets for people who would never learn his name. Soul-crushing monotony that paid just enough to service his debt and share a cramped apartment with 3 other struggling graduates. But he never stopped working on his own ideas. Nights belonged to his dreams. After the day job released him, Everett would return to that cramped apartment and code until his eyes burned. He was teaching himself programming through online tutorials and library books, building something new, something different, something that might finally work. His roommates thought he was crazy. His parents worried about his health. His few remaining friends from college drifted away because he never had time for dinners or drinks or normal human interaction. Everett told himself the isolation was temporary. Once he made it, he would reconnect, rebuild relationships, become a person again instead of a machine designed for achievement. The loneliness was just another price, another sacrifice on the altar of eventual success. He was 27 years old, exhausted to his bones, running on coffee and desperation, when he walked into a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon and saw her. Nadia Brooks sat alone at a corner table, laptop open, completely absorbed in whatever she was writing. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple puff. Her clothes were unremarkable: jeans, a worn sweater, practical boots, no makeup, no jewelry, nothing designed to attract attention. But Everett couldn't look away. There was something about her concentration, the way her fingers flew across the keyboard, the small smile that would appear, then vanish, as if she was having a private joke with whatever she was creating. She was lost in her own world. He recognized that look. He wore it himself every night. For 10 minutes he stood near the counter, pretending to decide on a drink while actually summoning the courage to speak to her. Everett Hale, who could pitch to venture capitalists without blinking, who could defend his ideas against hostile critics, who feared nothing in the business world, was terrified to talk to a woman in a coffee shop. Finally, he approached. "Whatever you're working on," he said, "it must be incredible. I've never seen anyone concentrate that hard." She looked up. Brown eyes met blue, and something shifted in the universe. Nadia Brooks was a writer, not a successful one, not yet. She wrote for a small online magazine that paid almost nothing and valued her work even less. But she wrote every day, regardless of compensation, because the words demanded to be released. "It's not a choice," she explained to Everett during that first conversation. "I don't decide to write. The stories decide they need to exist, and I'm just the tool they use to get onto the page." He understood immediately. The poet he'd buried years ago stirred slightly in his chest. "I used to write," he admitted. The first time he'd said those words aloud in a decade. "Used to?" "I chose a more practical path." Nadia studied him with those perceptive brown eyes. "That sounds like something someone taught you to say, not something you actually believe." She was right, but he wasn't ready to admit that yet. They talked for 3 hours that first day, closed down the coffee shop without noticing the time, exchanged numbers with hands that trembled slightly from the electricity passing between them. The next 6 months became the most alive Everett had ever felt. They existed in a world of late-night conversations and early morning texts, hours spent in her tiny studio apartment, surrounded by books and drafts and dreams. Cheap wine and cheaper takeout consumed cross-legged on her floor while they debated everything from philosophy to politics to the meaning of success. Nadia challenged every assumption he'd built his life upon. "Why do you need to be rich?" she asked one night, her head resting on his chest, her fingers tracing patterns on his arm. "What happens when you get there? Do you suddenly become happy?" "I become free." "Free from—" He couldn't answer. Not honestly. The fear was too deep, too shameful, too connected to candles in the darkness and a wedding ring that disappeared. She didn't push. Nadia never pushed. She simply created space for him to be whoever he needed to be in that moment. And slowly, he began to unfold. The poet emerged in fragments. He showed her stories he'd written as a teenager, confessed dreams he'd abandoned, revealed the parts of himself that ambition had forced into hiding. She received each piece like a gift. "This is who you really are," she said one evening, reading a short story he'd written years ago. "This sensitive, observant, deeply feeling person. The businessman is a costume. This is the real Everett Hale." He kissed her then, deeply, desperately, as if her words had unlocked something that had been sealed for years. Their physical intimacy grew from that emotional connection, quiet touches that spoke louder than words. The brush of fingertips across a cheekbone, foreheads pressed together in the darkness, bodies intertwined while rain beat against windows and the world outside ceased to exist. With Nadia, Everett learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that being known, truly known, was more valuable than any fortune. That love wasn't a distraction from success, but might actually be the point of it. She made him believe he could have both. The dream and the dreamer. The $1 billion and the beating heart. For 6 perfect months, he allowed himself to hope. The opportunity arrived disguised as salvation. A venture capitalist named Harrison Webb had somehow stumbled across Everett's side project, the software he'd been building during those exhausted late nights. Webb saw potential where others had seen nothing. He offered funding, real funding, enough to quit the soul-crushing day job and focus entirely on building something meaningful. There was just one condition. "I need all of you," Webb said during their first meeting. "Not half, not most. Every waking hour, every ounce of energy, every thought in your head. For the next 2 years minimum, probably longer. This is going to consume your entire life. Can you handle that?" Everett said yes without hesitation. He told himself Nadia would understand. She was a creator herself. She knew what it meant to be consumed by a vision. She would support him through this intense period, and then, when the company was established, when the pressure eased, they would have the rest of their lives together. That was the story he believed. Reality wrote a different one. The first month, he missed 2 dinner dates, called to apologize from conference rooms where investors waited impatiently for his return. Nadia understood. Of course she understood. The second month, he stopped calling as often. Text became his primary communication. Brief, distracted, functional. Nadia understood. She was busy too. The third month, he forgot her birthday. He remembered the next morning. Sent flowers, made promises about making it up to her. She forgave him. But something in her voice had changed. A distance that hadn't been there before. "I'm still here," she said. "But you're disappearing." He swore he wasn't. Swore this was temporary. Swore that the man who had opened his heart to her still existed beneath the founder frantically building an empire. But promises made in exhaustion hold less weight. The late-night conversations became weekly phone calls, then bi-weekly, then whenever he could steal a few minutes between crises. The quiet intimacy they'd built evaporated under the heat of his ambition. Nadia began to withdraw, not in anger, she was never angry, in self-protection. She stopped sharing her writing, stopped asking about his day, stopped expecting him to show up. The erosion was so gradual that Everett barely noticed until the canyon had already formed. One night, 8 months after Webb's investment, Nadia came to his apartment. She stood in the doorway of his home office, watching him attack his keyboard. With the same concentration she had once admired in the coffee shop. "I love you," she said quietly. He looked up, those 3 words hitting him like cold water. "I love you too. Then why can't you see me anymore?" He started to answer, to explain, to justify, but the honest answer was too painful to speak. Because the fear was stronger than the love. Because failure still haunted him more than loneliness. Because he had spent so many years building armor that he'd forgotten how to remove it, even for her. "I just need a little more time," he said instead. Nadia nodded slowly, sadly, like someone accepting an ending they'd seen coming for months. "Time is the one thing I can't keep giving, Everett. Not while I'm becoming invisible." She left that night. He let her. And that choice would haunt him for the next 6 years. Here's what Everett didn't understand until years later. Love wasn't broken between them. It wasn't betrayed or abandoned or destroyed. None of the dramatic endings that make for satisfying stories. It was simply postponed, put on hold by a young man too scared to balance his dreams with his heart, suspended by fear that convinced him he had to choose one or the other, frozen in time while he chased a future that wouldn't mean anything if he had no one to share it with. Nadia didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because loving someone who couldn't be present was slowly erasing her. Because she deserved more than phone calls sandwiched between investor meetings. Because she had watched her own mother disappear into a marriage where she came last, and she had promised herself she would never accept that fate. She left to save herself, and Everett was too consumed by his mission to even recognize what he was losing. The company succeeded spectacularly. Within 3 years, Hale Industries was worth hundreds of millions. Within 5, Everett had become the billionaire he'd always dreamed of becoming. Magazine covers, glowing profiles, invitations to exclusive gatherings where he was treated as royalty. He had escaped the darkness. silenced the fear, built walls high enough that no power company could ever cut his lights, no circumstance could ever make him feel powerless again. But victory tasted different than he'd expected. Emptier. He dated women who looked perfect on his arm, attended galas where everyone knew his name, purchased houses he rarely slept in, and cars he barely drove. None of it filled the hollow space where Nadia used to live. He thought about her constantly during those years, wondered where she was, what she was writing, whether she ever thought about him, whether she knew that the boy who had read her his teenage stories still existed somewhere beneath the billionaire. He never reached out. Pride, perhaps, or fear of rejection, or the shameful knowledge that he had no right to re-enter her life after the way he'd let her fade from his. So he did what ambitious men often do when their hearts become inconvenient. He found someone else, someone who fit the life he'd built, rather than the life he'd abandoned. Clarissa Monroe was everything Nadia wasn't. Polished where Nadia was natural, strategic where Nadia was spontaneous, ambitious in ways that complemented his empire rather than challenged his assumptions. She was the logical choice, the practical choice, the choice that made sense on spreadsheets and in society columns. He convinced himself that logic was enough. He convinced himself that the love he'd felt for Nadia was a young man's fantasy, intense but impractical, the kind of passion that burned bright and then burned out, leaving nothing but ash. What he had with Clarissa was sustainable, adult, reasonable, and if it didn't make his heart race the way it once had in a crowded coffee shop, well, perhaps that was simply what mature love felt like. He was wrong, of course, but he wouldn't understand how wrong until he stood at that altar, phone in hand, reading 4 words that would collapse the careful life he'd constructed. She's your daughter. Some loves don't die when you try to bury them. They simply wait underground, gathering strength, preparing to break through at the moment you least expect, the moment you most need them to. Before we continue with what happens next, I want to pause here and ask you something personal. Have you ever loved someone at the wrong time in your life? Met the right person when you weren't the right version of yourself? Let something real slip away because you were too focused on other goals, too afraid of vulnerability, too convinced that love could wait while you built your future. If that resonates with you, drop a comment below. Share your experience. Tell me what you would have done differently if you could go back. Because this story, Everett and Nadia's story, is really about second chances, about whether we can ever truly undo the mistakes we made when we were too young or too scared or too driven to know better. And I think your stories might matter just as much as theirs. Now, let's continue. Success came faster than Everett had ever dared to imagine. The software platform he'd built during those exhausted late nights became the foundation of something extraordinary. Within 18 months of Harrison Webb's initial investment, Hale Industries had attracted attention from every major tech player in the country. The product was revolutionary, an enterprise solution that streamlined operations in ways competitors couldn't replicate. Fortune 500 companies lined up for contracts. Investors who had once ignored Everett's calls now begged for meetings. Money poured in like rain after a drought. The first million felt surreal. Everett remembered staring at his bank statement, unable to process that the number was real. That he, the kid who had watched his mother sell her wedding ring, now had 7 figures in liquid assets. The first 10 million felt validating. Proof that every sacrifice had been worth it. Every missed dinner, every abandoned relationship, every night spent coding while the world slept. The first 100 million felt like armor. Finally, he was untouchable. No circumstance could make him vulnerable. No power company could threaten darkness. No employer could dispose of him like furniture. He had become the force he'd always dreamed of becoming. By 32, Everett Hale was worth over $1 billion. Hale Industries occupied 3 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper. 400 employees carried out his vision with military precision. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like The Architect of Tomorrow and How One Man is Reshaping Enterprise Technology. He had arrived. The destination he'd been racing towards since childhood finally lay beneath his feet. But arriving somewhere doesn't guarantee you'll want to stay. The corner office on the 47th floor offered views that stretched to the horizon. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, a desk that cost more than his parents' first house. Everything designed to project power and success. Everett spent 12 hours a day in that office, and most of those hours he felt absolutely nothing. The passion that had once driven him, the fire that burned through exhaustion and doubt, had dimmed to embers. The work that used to excite him now felt like obligation. Meetings blurred into meetings. Decisions became routine. The company ran itself, really, propelled by the systems he'd built and the people he'd hired. His presence was almost ceremonial, but still he came, every morning, every evening. Because if he wasn't building, what was he? If the work stopped mattering, what had all the sacrifice been for? Wealth, Everett discovered, was the loneliest country on earth. The higher he climbed, the fewer people could reach him. Not because they didn't try. Everyone tried. Investors wanted access. Employees wanted favor. Strangers wanted pieces of the fortune he'd accumulated. But genuine connection? That became nearly impossible. Every conversation carried an agenda. Every smile hid a calculation. Every friendship request masked a transaction. Everett learned to read people the way analysts read financial statements, searching for the bottom line beneath the pleasant presentation. Most people wanted something from him. The few who didn't were too intimidated to treat him normally. Old college acquaintances grew awkward around his success. Distant relatives suddenly remembered their connection. Even his own parents seemed uncertain how to behave around the son who had outgrown everything they understood. His mother still ironed her clothes the night before wearing them. His father still flinched at unexpected bills. They lived in the modest house Everett had bought them, comfortable but not extravagant, because they couldn't accept extravagance. "It doesn't feel like ours," his mother had explained when he offered to upgrade them to something larger. "This feels like enough." Enough, a word Everett had chased his entire life. And now that he had more than enough, he realized he'd never actually defined what the word meant. He attended galas where everyone knew his name and no one knew his heart. Sat at dinner tables surrounded by people who laughed at his jokes because of his net worth, not his wit. Accepted awards for achievements that felt increasingly hollow. The penthouse apartment he called home occupied the top floor of a building he partly owned. 3,000 square feet of designer furniture and curated art and expansive windows showcasing a city that never slept. Most nights Everett ate dinner alone at a kitchen island that seated 12. His phone buzzed constantly, notifications from executives, assistants, board members, journalists. Everyone wanted a piece of his attention. His time was sliced into 15-minute increments, scheduled months in advance. But no one asked how he was feeling. No one noticed that the light in his eyes had gone dim. No one challenged his assumptions or demanded vulnerability or created space for the poet still buried somewhere beneath the billionaire. Nadia would have noticed. The thought arrived uninvited, as it often did. He pushed it away, as he always did. She was gone. That chapter was closed. Dwelling on what might have been served no purpose. Better to focus on what he had built, what he controlled, what couldn't be taken away, even if what he had built was a beautiful prison, even if what he controlled was slowly suffocating him. Everett's life operated like a well-designed machine. Every morning began at 5:30 a.m., 45 minutes with a personal trainer in his private gym. Precisely measured breakfast prepared by a nutritionist who never asked about preferences, only optimized for performance. His calendar was a masterpiece of efficiency. Meetings color-coded by priority. Travel scheduled around board obligations. Even leisure time, the rare occasions it existed, was assigned to specific slots and purposes. Golf with investors on Tuesday afternoons. Charity appearances on select Thursday evenings. Weekend retreats with carefully curated guest lists designed to strengthen strategic relationships. Nothing spontaneous. Nothing unplanned. Nothing that couldn't be anticipated and prepared for. Emotions received the same treatment. Everett had learned to schedule feelings the way he scheduled conference calls. Frustration was processed during morning workouts, converted to physical exertion that left no residue. Anxiety was addressed in weekly sessions with a therapist who cost $800 per hour and never pushed past comfortable boundaries. Grief, loneliness, longing. These were filed away in mental compartments that rarely opened. Occasionally, late at night when the penthouse felt too large and the silence pressed too close, something would leak through. A memory of laughter in a cramped apartment, the scent of cheap wine and optimism, brown eyes that saw through every mask he constructed. But those moments passed. They always passed. Morning would arrive with its relentless schedule, and the machine would resume its programmed operations. Control was everything. Control had lifted him from poverty. Control had built his empire. Control had protected him from the chaos that destroyed weaker men. If control also prevented genuine connection, Well, that was simply the cost of security. His assistant, Margaret, had worked for him for 4 years. She knew his preferences better than anyone alive. Black coffee, no sugar. Meetings never before 8 a.m. Calls screened and prioritized according to criteria she'd memorized. She did not know his favorite book. Did not know that he once wrote poetry. Did not know that he kept a faded photograph in his desk drawer, a picture of a woman in a yellow sundress on a beach at sunset, laughing at something just outside the frame. Nobody knew about the photograph. Some things, even the most controlled life cannot eliminate. Some things persist despite every effort to file them away. But Everett had become masterful at pretending otherwise. The mask fit perfectly. It always did. Until someone came along who almost made him want to remove it. Clarissa Monroe entered Everett's life at a charity auction in the Hamptons. She was bidding on a rare first edition novel, something by Hemingway, with the casual confidence of someone who had never worried about a price tag. Blonde hair swept into an elegant twist. Dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Posture that suggested finishing schools and cotillion balls and a lifetime of knowing exactly where she belonged. Everett noticed her competence before her beauty, the way she calculated bids, the strategic timing of her raises, the slight smile when she secured the prize for less than she'd clearly been prepared to pay. She approached him afterward. "You're Everett Hale," she said. Not a question, not impressed, simply acknowledging a fact. "And you're Clarissa Monroe." Her eyebrow arched slightly. "You know who I am? I know everyone worth knowing in this room. You're one of the few worth talking to." She laughed. A controlled sound, pleasant but measured. "That's either the most arrogant thing I've ever heard or the most honest. I haven't decided which. Let me know when you figure it out." Their courtship proceeded with the efficiency of a corporate merger. Dinner at establishments that required reservations months in advance. Weekends at her family's estate in Connecticut. Public appearances at events where their combined presence generated exactly the right kind of attention. Clarissa understood his world because she inhabited one just like it. Her family's shipping empire had been accumulating wealth for 4 generations. She had grown up surrounded by power, taught from childhood how to wield it gracefully. She never asked intrusive questions about his feelings, never demanded emotional availability he couldn't provide, never pushed past the comfortable boundaries he had established around his interior life. They discussed business strategies over dinner, analyzed mutual acquaintances with surgical precision, planned futures that made perfect sense on paper. She was intelligent, capable, and perfectly suited to the role of a billionaire's wife. If she noticed that something was missing, some spark that elevated partnership into passion, she never mentioned it. Perhaps she didn't notice. Perhaps she had her own reasons for accepting less than fireworks. Clarissa came from a family where marriages were alliances, where compatibility meant complementary ambitions rather than emotional intimacy, where love was something you built deliberately over time, not something that struck like lightning and demanded your surrender. She'd been raised to value stability over intensity. Everett had been shaped by poverty to crave the same. On paper, they were perfect. In practice, they were 2 controlled people controlling a relationship that never threatened their carefully constructed defenses. Comfortable, convenient, correct, but not consuming. Never consuming. The proposal happened exactly as planned. Everett reserved a private dining room at Clarissa's favorite restaurant, arranged for her preferred flowers, white orchids, to adorn every surface, coordinated with her assistant to ensure she wore something appropriate for the photographs that would inevitably surface. Nothing left to chance. Every detail optimized. He knelt at precisely the right moment, produced a ring that had been designed after consultations with 3 jewelers and 1 discreet inquiry about her preferred gemstone cut, spoke words he had rehearsed until they sounded natural. "Clarissa, you make my life better. You understand me in ways few people can. I want to build a future with you. Will you marry me?" She said yes without hesitation, smiled beautifully for the waiter who had been tipped generously to capture the moment, kissed him with appropriate passion, enough to seem genuine, not enough to appear unseemly. They celebrated with champagne that cost more than some cars, called their families with the news, began immediately discussing wedding logistics, venues, guest lists, timing, public relations considerations. At no point did Everett feel the floor shifting beneath his feet. At no point did his heart race in a way that threatened his composure. At no point did he look at Clarissa and feel that overwhelming certainty, that sense of finally and completely. and forever, that he had once felt in a cramped apartment surrounded by books and drafts and dreams, but he had convinced himself that those feelings were youthful foolishness, chemical reactions that faded with maturity, the emotional equivalent of junk food, satisfying in the moment but ultimately unsustainable. What he had with Clarissa was better, healthier, more likely to endure. This was what adult love looked like. Calm, steady, reasonable. The engagement announcement generated exactly the response he expected. Business publications analyzed the strategic implications of uniting two powerful families. Society pages celebrated the glamorous coupling. His board members expressed approval. Everyone agreed it was a perfect match. Everett agreed too. Publicly, enthusiastically. Privately, late at night in his penthouse, he sometimes opened that desk drawer, looked at the photograph of a woman in a yellow sundress, wondered where she was, what she was doing, whether she ever thought of him. Then he would close the drawer, return the mask to his face, resume the programmed operations of his perfectly controlled existence. He was about to marry Clarissa Monroe. This was the logical choice, the smart choice, the choice that made sense for two people who valued stability over chaos, partnership over passion, comfort over the terrifying vulnerability of genuine connection, comfort without connection. That was what he had chosen. That was what he believed he wanted. And he might have lived his entire life inside that comfortable numbness. Married Clarissa produced appropriate heirs, aged gracefully within the prison he had built, if not for a phone call on his wedding day, if not for a name appearing on his screen that collapsed every wall he had constructed, if not for 4 words that forced him to confront a truth he had been running from for 6 years. Some loves cannot be scheduled. Some connections cannot be controlled. Some pieces of ourselves refuse to stay buried, no matter how efficiently we try to file them away. Nadia was about to re-enter his life, and nothing would ever be logical again. The minister's voice carried through the cathedral like a river, flowing toward an inevitable destination. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted. Everett stood at the altar, Clarissa's hand in his, 300 faces watching from the pews. The weight of their collective expectation pressed against his chest like a physical force. This was the moment, the culmination of 18 months of planning, the public declaration that would bind him to Clarissa Monroe in the eyes of God, law, and society. He should have been focused entirely on her. Instead, his mind kept cataloging irrelevant details. The slight tremor in the minister's left hand, age or nerves, he couldn't tell. The way afternoon light had shifted since the ceremony began, now casting longer shadows across the marble floor. A child somewhere in the back pews, fidgeting despite a parent's whispered warnings. Clarissa squeezed his fingers, gentle but deliberate, a silent reminder to be present. He squeezed back, forced his attention to her face. She looked radiant, objectively, undeniably radiant. The dress, the veil, the careful makeup that enhanced without overwhelming. Her blue eyes shining with something that might have been joy, or might have been the performance of joy. He had never been entirely sure which. The commitment you are about to make, the minister continued, is the most sacred agreement between two people. It requires unwavering faith, unconditional love, and the courage to choose each other, day after day for the rest of your lives. Unwavering faith, unconditional love. The words landed differently than they should have. They felt like accusations rather than aspirations, like a test he already knew he would fail. Because standing at this altar, holding this woman's hand, preparing to speak, vows of eternal devotion, Everett could not silence the voice in his head, the voice that whispered another name, the voice that questioned whether he had ever truly stopped loving someone else. The minister smiled benevolently. At this time, the couple will exchange their vows. Everett, please repeat after me. This was it, the threshold, the moment of no return. Everett drew a breath, opened his mouth to speak, and felt his phone vibrate against his thigh. The vibration was subtle, a soft pulse against his leg that no one else could have detected. Everett ignored it. Of course he ignored it. Only a madman would check his phone during his own wedding vows. The minister began the traditional words. I, Everett James Hale, take you, Clarissa Ann Monroe. I, Everett James Hale, he repeated, take you, Clarissa Ann Monroe. Another vibration, longer this time, more insistent. His voice faltered for a fraction of a second, recovered, continued. To be my lawfully wedded wife. To be my lawfully wedded wife. The phone buzzed again. 3 short pulses in rapid succession. The pattern his settings reserved for urgent contacts only, but he hadn't designated anyone as urgent. His assistant knew not to disturb him today. His board members had been explicitly warned. Even his mother understood that this ceremony was sacred. Who would be calling? To have and to hold, from this day forward. To have and to hold. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. Mechanical. From this day forward. Clarissa's brow creased, almost imperceptibly. A micro-expression so brief that only someone watching closely would notice. She was watching closely. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. The words tasted like ash on his tongue. He kept speaking, kept performing, kept pushing through the ritual while his mind fragmented into competing tracks. Track 1, the vows, the ceremony, the life he was committing to. Track 2, the phone, the urgency, the inexplicable certainty that something was wrong. In sickness and in health. Another vibration, continuous now. Not a text, a call. Someone was calling him, during his wedding, refusing to be ignored. To love and to cherish. His hand trembled slightly, the one not holding Clarissa's, the one positioned near the pocket where his phone refused to stay silent. Until death do us part. He finished the phrase. The minister nodded approvingly, turned to Clarissa for her reciprocal vows. The phone stopped buzzing. Everett exhaled slowly. Whatever it was, could wait. Whatever crisis demanded attention could be addressed after the ceremony. In an hour, he would be married. In 2 hours, he would be at the reception. By evening, the phone call would be a forgotten footnote. Clarissa began speaking her vows. Her voice steady, her words perfect. I, Clarissa Ann Monroe, take you, Everett James Hale, to be my lawfully wedded husband. Everett watched her lips move, heard the promises she was making, felt the weight of what she was offering, her name, her future, her faith that he was worthy of both. The phone vibrated again. Different pattern this time. A text, then another, then another. 5 messages in 15 seconds. Clarissa's eyes flickered to his pocket. The movement in the fabric was visible now. Her vows continued without interruption, but something hardened in her expression. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. Everett's heart rate climbed. His palms grew damp. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong, that whoever was trying to reach him would not stop, that ignoring this demand would have consequences he couldn't yet fathom. In sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. Clarissa finished, smiled, waited for the minister to continue. The phone buzzed once more, a single long pulse, then silence. The minister cleared his throat. The rings, please. The best man stepped forward, produced the platinum bands that had been custom designed to Clarissa's specifications, handed them over with practiced precision. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Everything except the phone that now felt like a bomb in Everett's pocket. He took Clarissa's ring, prepared to slide it onto her finger, prepared to seal this commitment with metal and words and the witnessing of 300 influential guests. His hand moved toward hers, and stopped. He couldn't do it, couldn't take this final step while something unknown demanded his attention with such desperate persistence. I'm sorry, he said quietly. One moment. Before his brain could override his instinct, his hand reached into his pocket, pulled out the phone, looked at the screen. The cathedral fell silent. One name, 4 letters, Nadia. The screen glowed with a name he hadn't seen in 6 years, a name he had trained himself to stop thinking about, a name that had no business appearing on this day, at this altar, in this moment. Beneath it, a string of text messages. Please answer. I wouldn't call if it wasn't life or death. She's your daughter. She's dying. Please come. Everett, I'm begging you. City General Hospital. Pediatric ICU. Please. Everett's vision tunneled. The cathedral, the flowers, the guests, the woman standing before him. All of it collapsed to the edges of his awareness. Only the words remained. She's your daughter. She's dying. Daughter. The word didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. He had no daughter. He had no children. He had been careful, always careful, because children were complications that ambitious young men couldn't afford. But the mind is faster than denial. It was already doing the math, already counting backward, already arriving at a timeline that aligned with terrifying precision. 6 years ago, the summer with Nadia, the months before she disappeared, before she vanished without explanation, before she erased herself from his life so completely that he eventually stopped searching. Everett? Clarissa's voice seemed to come from miles away. What is it? He couldn't answer, couldn't form words, couldn't do anything except stare at the screen while his carefully constructed world crumbled like sand in a rising tide. A daughter, his daughter, dying. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, like it contained the gravitational pull of an entirely different life, one he had never known existed, one that had been happening in parallel while he built his empire and proposed to Clarissa and planned this perfect wedding. Somewhere out there, for the past 5 years, a child had been growing, learning to walk, learning to speak, asking questions about the father she had never met, and he hadn't known. How could he not have known? Why hadn't Nadia told him? Everett. Clarissa's voice carried an edge now. Steel beneath silk. What is happening? He looked up from the phone, met her eyes. She saw something in his face that made her take a small step backward. Instinctive, protective, the first crack in her perfect composure. I have to go. The words emerged without permission, without thought, without any calculation about consequences or optics or the 300 witnesses who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. What do you mean you have to go? Clarissa's whisper was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm sorry. He was already moving, already pocketing the phone, already calculating the fastest route to City General Hospital. I'm so sorry. I have to go. Everett. He didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Every second he remained in this cathedral was a second his daughter spent dying without knowing her father existed. If she was his daughter, if this was real, if Nadia wasn't somehow mistaken or lying or... But he knew. On some level beneath logic and doubt, he knew. Nadia would never lie about something like this, would never reach out after 6 years of silence for anything less than absolute truth, would never beg if begging wasn't necessary. She's dying. The words played on repeat as Everett walked back down the aisle he had planned to leave as a married man. He passed his mother, whose face had gone white with confusion, past the groomsmen, frozen in various poses of disbelief, past Clarissa's family, whose expressions shifted from shock to rage in the time it took him to cover 10 feet. He didn't explain, didn't stop, didn't look back. The cathedral doors opened before him like a wound splitting open. Sunlight hit his face. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions that blended into meaningless noise. Everett pushed through all of it, found his driver, barked an address, and left his wedding behind like a burning building he no longer recognized as home. City General Hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Everett burst through the emergency entrance still wearing his wedding tuxedo, bow tie, askew, eyes wild with a desperation he had never allowed himself to show in public. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Someone recognized him and raised a phone camera. He didn't care. For the first time in his adult life, he genuinely did not care what anyone thought. Pediatric ICU, he demanded at the information desk. Where is it? The receptionist blinked at the intensity of his tone. 4th floor, East Wing. But sir, visiting hours. He was already running toward the elevators. The ride to the 4th floor lasted an eternity compressed into 40 seconds. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The elevator music, some bastardized version of a Beatles song, felt like mockery. His reflection in the polished doors showed a man he barely recognized. Ding. 4th floor, East Wing, Pediatric ICU. The hallway stretched before him like a gauntlet. Walls painted in colors meant to soothe, soft blues, gentle greens. That couldn't mask the gravity of what happened behind these doors. Machines beeped in rhythms that measured lives in electrical pulses. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere else, parents murmured prayers to any god who might be listening. Everett walked past doors with small windows revealing small beds containing small bodies attached to too many wires. Each one could have been his daughter. Each one a reminder of the fragility he had spent his whole life trying to outrun. Then he saw her. Nadia stood in the hallway outside room 412, leaning against the wall as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Arms wrapped around herself, eyes closed, face carrying 6 years of exhaustion that no amount of rest could erase. She was still beautiful, older, worn, but beautiful in that way that had nothing to do with presentation and everything to do with essence. She opened her eyes as he approached, no surprise in them. She had known he would come. "You're here." Her voice cracked on the second word. "What happened?" The question emerged harsher than he intended, rougher, edged with 6 years of silence and 20 minutes of panic. "What do you mean she's my daughter? Why didn't you tell me? Why?" "Not here." Nadia glanced at the door behind her. "Not now. She's sleeping. Her body needs rest before the next round of treatment. I have a daughter. You have too." The world tilted. Everett reached for the wall, missed, found it on the second attempt, leaned against it the way Nadia was leaning. Like gravity had suddenly doubled. "What?" "Twins, Everett." Nadia's eyes glistened, but didn't spill over. She had been crying for too long to have tears left. "Girls, Zoe and Maya. They're 5 years old, and Zoe has leukemia. Twins, 2 daughters, 5 years old, leukemia." The words stacked on top of each other like bricks, each one adding weight to a structure he couldn't support. "I don't..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't know what he was trying to say. Understanding? Belief? Forgiveness? Everything was happening too fast, crashing over him in waves that left no time to breathe. "Maya is healthy," Nadia continued. Her voice had found that flat calm that comes after prolonged crisis. "But she's not a bone marrow match. Neither am I. Zoe needs a transplant, and you might be compatible. That's why I called. That's the only reason I called." "The only reason?" Something flickered in her expression. Pain, maybe, or anger at a question she didn't have the energy to answer. "What did you expect, Everett? That I called to win you back? That I timed this to ruin your wedding on purpose?" She laughed bitterly. "I didn't even know you were getting married today. I've spent the last 5 years trying very hard not to know anything about your life. Why didn't you tell me?" The question that had been building since he read her texts finally exploded. 5 years. You kept this from me for 5 years. I had a right to know. Did you? Nadia straightened, drew herself to full height. Her eyes met his without flinching. "You made your choice 6 years ago, Everett. You chose the company, the career, the future that didn't include me. So I made my choice too. That's not the same thing, isn't it?" He wanted to argue, wanted to rage, wanted to demand explanations that made sense of this insanity, but a sound from behind the door stopped him cold. A small cough. A child's voice, weak but distinct. "Mommy." Nadia's expression transformed instantly. The hardness melted. The exhaustion remained, but softened into something tender. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." She opened the door, and Everett saw his daughter for the first time. Zoe was small. That was his first thought. She was so impossibly small, swallowed by the hospital bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred and monitored every vital function. Tubes connected her thin arms to bags of fluid. Wires disappeared beneath a hospital gown, decorated with cartoon animals, cheerful drawings that seemed cruel against the reality of what they covered. Her hair was gone. Chemotherapy had taken it, leaving a smooth scalp that somehow made her eyes appear even larger. Brown eyes, Nadia's eyes, but the shape of her face, the jaw, the cheekbones, the way her brow furrowed when she focused, that was his. That was undeniably, unmistakably his. "Mommy, who's that man?" The question was directed at Nadia, but those eyes, his eyes, her eyes, stayed fixed on Everett, curious, unafraid, exhausted in a way no 5-year-old should ever be, but still curious. He couldn't speak. His throat had closed around something massive and sharp. Nadia sat on the edge of the bed, smoothed a blanket that didn't need smoothing. "This is someone Mommy knows from a long time ago. He came to visit. Is he a doctor?" "No, sweetheart. He's not a doctor." Zoe studied Everett with the frank assessment that only children and the very old are capable of. No social filters, no polite pretense. "He looks scared," she observed. Nadia almost smiled. "He's just worried about you. Everyone who meets you worries about you these days. Because I'm sick. Because you're sick. But you're also very brave. Zoe nodded seriously, accepting this truth about herself. Then her attention drifted to the window, to the fading daylight, to the kind of nothing that sick children spend hours contemplating. Everett stood frozen in the doorway. This was his daughter. This small, fragile person fighting a battle that billionaires couldn't buy their way out of. She was his. She had been his for 5 years, living, growing, laughing, playing, and now suffering. All without knowing he existed. All because he had chosen a company over her mother. The realization crashed over him like an avalanche. Not gradually, but all at once. The full weight of what he had missed, what he had been denied, what his choices had cost, not just him, but this child who had done nothing wrong. First steps he never witnessed. First words he never heard. 5 birthdays, 5 Christmases, 5 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and moments that could never be recovered. He had been building an empire while his daughter built a life without him. And now that life might be ending. I need some air. The words came out strangled, broken. He turned and walked blindly down the hallway, past the nurse's station, past the waiting room filled with other parents wearing the same haunted expressions, until he found an exit to a small outdoor courtyard. The evening air hit his face. Cool, clean, real. Everett sank onto a bench and put his head in his hands. Everything he had constructed, the control, the strategy, the perfectly managed existence, all of it felt suddenly, devastatingly pointless. What good was $1 billion if it couldn't save his daughter? What good was power if it couldn't undo the years he had lost? He had spent his entire adult life trying to escape the helplessness he'd felt as a child watching his parents struggle, building walls high enough that nothing could threaten his security. And here he was, more helpless than he had ever been, more vulnerable than all the money in the world could protect against. The past he had buried was demanding its reckoning. The choice he had made 6 years ago, to prioritize ambition over love, had created ripples he never saw coming, had produced a daughter he never knew existed, had led to this moment, on this bench in his wedding tuxedo, while inside a hospital his child fought for her life. The past demands an answer. He understood now what that meant. You could run from your history. You could build empires to escape it. You could construct new identities and new relationships and new futures that looked nothing like where you came from. But eventually, the bill comes due. Eventually, everything you tried to leave behind shows up demanding payment. And the only currency accepted is truth. Everett pulled out his phone. The screen showed 47 missed calls. Texts from Clarissa, from his mother, from his assistant, from board members, from journalists who had already caught wind of the scandal. He ignored all of them. Instead, he opened a search engine. Typed 2 words, bone marrow. He was about to learn everything he could about saving his daughter's life. The past had demanded an answer, and Everett Hale was finally ready to give one. Clarissa Monroe did not fall apart. She stood at that altar for exactly 17 seconds after Everett disappeared through the cathedral doors. 17 seconds of complete stillness while 300 guests held. Their breath and cameras continued their merciless documentation. Then she moved. Not toward the exit. Not toward her mother, who was already rising from the front pew with murder in her eyes. Not toward the bridesmaids frozen in their dusty rose gowns like mannequins in a department store window. Clarissa walked calmly to the minister, took the microphone from his trembling hands, faced the congregation with a spine that could have been forged from titanium. I apologize for the interruption. Her voice carried through the cathedral without a single tremor, decades of social training crystallizing in this impossible moment. It appears there has been an emergency that requires Everett's immediate attention. I ask that you give us privacy while we address this situation. The reception will not be proceeding as planned. She handed the microphone back, nodded once to the stunned minister, walked down the aisle with measured steps that betrayed nothing of the earthquake happening inside her chest. Her mother intercepted her at the door. Clarissa, what? Not here, mother. But the guests. I said, not here. Victoria Monroe had never heard that tone from her daughter, had never seen that particular hardness in eyes that were usually calculated but calm. She stepped aside without another word. Clarissa disappeared into the antechamber where brides prepared for their grand entrances, closed the door behind her, locked it. Then, and only then, did she allow herself to breathe. The room was exactly as she had left it an hour ago. Makeup scattered across the vanity, her veil's original box sitting open on the settee, a bottle of champagne, The good stuff, Dom Perignon 2004, that her maid of honor had smuggled in for pre-ceremony nerves. She hadn't needed it then. She needed it now. Clarissa poured a glass with steady hands, drank it in 3 long swallows, poured another. Her reflection stared back from the ornate mirror. Still radiant, still perfect. The dress still immaculate, the hair still precisely arranged, the makeup still flawless. She looked exactly like a woman who should be getting married right now. Instead, she was alone in a locked room, drinking champagne meant for celebration while her fiancé ran toward something, or someone, more important than their shared future. The phone call. She had seen his face when he looked at the screen, had watched the color drain from his features like someone had opened a vein, had witnessed something she had never seen in 4 years of careful observation. Fear, raw, unfiltered fear, and beneath it, something else. Something that cut deeper than panic. Recognition. Whoever had called him, whatever crisis had summoned him away, it wasn't new. It wasn't unexpected in the way genuine emergencies surprised people. He had looked at that phone like a man confronting a ghost he had known would appear eventually. Like a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Clarissa was not a fool. She had not survived 3 decades in high society by ignoring obvious truths. She had not built her reputation on self-delusion. There was another woman. Perhaps there had always been another woman. Perhaps the slight distance she had sensed in Everett, the places he wouldn't to go, the depths he wouldn't share, had always been occupied by someone else. She finished the second glass, set it down carefully. The anger would come later. The grief, the betrayal, the inevitable questions about what she had missed and what she should have seen, all of that waited in her future like creditors patient for payment. Right now, there was only one priority: survival. Monroe women did not crumble in public. They did not provide ammunition for gossip columns or satisfaction for enemies. They handled their disasters with the same elegance they brought to their triumphs. Clarissa Monroe would walk out of this cathedral with her dignity intact. Whatever broken pieces she collected afterward, she would examine in private. The decision had made itself. That was what Everett would realize later, replaying those moments in the cathedral over and over in the sleepless nights that followed. There was no deliberation, no weighing of options, no careful analysis of costs and benefits. The moment he read Nadia's words, "She's your daughter, she's dying," his body was already moving. Toward the door, away from Clarissa, away from the life he had built so carefully, so strategically, so completely. His mind hadn't caught up until he was halfway to the hospital. Now, sitting on the bench in the courtyard, he tried to reconstruct his own reasoning. Tried to understand why a man who calculated everything, every investment, every partnership, every public appearance, had abandoned calculation entirely at the moment it mattered most. He had walked away from his wedding, not postponed it, not requested a brief delay, not offered any explanation that might have preserved his relationship, his reputation, his carefully constructed public image. He had simply left because his daughter was dying, because there was a child in a hospital bed who had never seen his face, because every second he spent at that altar was a second stolen from a little girl running out of time. The math was simple, really. Clarissa would survive his departure. She would be hurt, humiliated, angry. Their relationship might be salvageable, or it might be destroyed. Either way, she would wake up tomorrow morning with her health, her family, her resources, her future. Zoe might not wake up at all. That was the calculation his body had made before his mind could interfere. The instinct that had overridden decades of conditioning, months of planning, years of carefully managed risk avoidance. When the equation reduced to its simplest terms, attend a ceremony or save a life, there was only one possible answer. But the simplicity of the choice didn't erase its consequences. Everett pulled up his phone, scrolled through the growing list of missed calls, saw Clarissa's name appear 3 times, 4 times, 5. Each call carried a weight he wasn't ready to lift. What could he say? What explanation would make sense of what he had done? "I just discovered I have a daughter. She's dying of leukemia. Her mother is a woman I loved before I met you. I'm sorry I left our wedding to go to her." Every sentence made him sound like a character in a bad drama. Every explanation felt inadequate against the magnitude of what had happened. He had kept Nadia's existence from Clarissa. Not actively, he rarely thought about her consciously, but by omission, by refusing to excavate his own past, by presenting himself as a man without history, without baggage, without ghosts. And now those ghosts had materialized at the worst possible moment. The phone buzzed again. A text this time, from his mother. "Where are you? Clarissa is asking for you. The guests are leaving. Please call me." His mother, who had ironed uniforms at midnight, who had sold her wedding ring without complaint, who had raised him to believe that hard work conquered all obstacles. She had watched him become a billionaire, watched him build everything they had once lacked, watched him choose a bride who came from a world Eleanor Hale could barely comprehend. Now she was watching him destroy it all. He couldn't call her, not yet. Couldn't explain what he didn't fully understand himself. Instead, he typed a message to Clarissa. 3 words that felt pathetically insufficient, but were all he could manage. "I am sorry." Then he turned his phone to silent, slipped it back into his pocket. The hospital waited behind him. His daughter waited. Nadia waited. His old life, the wedding, the merger, the perfect future, waited too. But that life felt like it belonged to someone else now. Someone who hadn't yet learned that you could run from your past, but you couldn't outrun your blood. The cathedral emptied slowly, like a wound refusing to close. 300 guests filtered toward the exits in clusters of whispered speculation. Phone screens glowed as news spread faster than any official statement could contain it. Within 20 minutes, the hashtag Hale Wedding Disaster began trending on social media. The theories multiplied with each passing minute. Business rivals speculated about a corporate emergency, a hostile takeover perhaps, a market crash requiring immediate intervention. That would explain the urgency, if not the complete abandonment of decorum. Society columnists crafted more personal narratives. Cold feet, obviously. The billionaire bachelor had finally choked when confronted with permanent commitment. It happened to the best of them, the terror of forever proving stronger than love. Conspiracy theorists went darker. Secret scandals, hidden crimes, government investigations that couldn't wait for vows to be exchanged. Nobody guessed the truth. Nobody imagined a dying child in a hospital bed just across the city. Everett's business associates huddled near the cathedral steps, BlackBerries and iPhones pressed to ears, as they tried to extract information from assistants and analysts and anyone who might know something. His assistant isn't answering. No response from the office either. The board is going to have a field day with this. Harrison Webb, the venture capitalist who had launched Everett's career, stood apart from the others. His weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts. He had known Everett for over a decade, had watched him navigate crises that would have broken lesser men. This was different. Webb had seen Everett's face before he left, had caught the moment when the phone screen registered and everything changed. That wasn't the face of a man dealing with business problems. That was the face of a man whose world had just fractured. On the Monroe side, the reaction was considerably less restrained. Malcolm Monroe, Clarissa's father, had turned an alarming shade of purple. His voice carried across the cathedral steps despite his efforts at discretion. "I want to know who was on that phone. I want to know where he went. And I want to know within the hour." His wife Victoria clutched his arm, her own fury masked behind a composed expression. "Lower your voice. We're being photographed. Let them photograph. Let them see what happens when someone humiliates this family." The Monroe family had not achieved 4 generations of wealth by accepting slights gracefully. They had built their empire on calculated aggression and strategic retaliation. Everett Hale had just made himself an enemy in ways he probably couldn't yet comprehend. The bridesmaids clustered around a limousine, unsure whether to wait for Clarissa or proceed to the reception venue that would now sit empty. Their phones buzzed constantly, friends and family demanding updates, gossip seekers fishing for details. Should we go inside, see if she needs anything? Her mother said to give her space, but she's been in there for almost half an hour. What would you say if you went in? What could anyone possibly say? They had no answers. None of them had ever witnessed anything like this. Weddings went wrong in predictable ways. Drunken speeches, weather disasters, family arguments. They didn't end with the groom sprinting out the door before vows were completed. The photographers packed their equipment with disappointed efficiency. They had been promised the wedding of the year. Instead, they had captured something far more valuable. Scandal footage that would command premium prices from tabloids worldwide. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. Billionaire bolts, Everett Hale abandons bride at altar. Wedding disaster, tech mogul leaves Monroe heiress standing. The call that ended IT all, mystery phone call destroys society wedding. The truth would emerge eventually. It always did. But for now, speculation was all anyone had. And speculation in the hands of society's elite could be more destructive than any confirmed fact. Later, when Everett tried to remember the walk down the aisle, he would recall it in fragments, disconnected images that refused to form a coherent sequence. The white runner beneath his feet, pristine and mocking. Rose petals the flower girls had scattered, now crushed under his urgent steps. Faces turning toward him like flowers following an unexpected sun, confused, shocked, hungry for explanation. His mother rising from her pew, hand reaching toward him, mouth forming a question he didn't stop to hear. The best man, Derek, reliable Derek who had organized the bachelor party, and kept the rings safe, standing frozen with his mouth hanging open. Clarissa's voice behind him, tight with controlled fury. Everett. And through all of it, the only clear thought, keep moving. Don't stop. She's dying. The aisle had never seemed so long. He had walked this same path during the rehearsal, timing his steps to the music, practicing the measured pace that would project confidence and joy. That walk had taken approximately 90 seconds. This walk took forever. Every step carried him further from the life he had planned. Every step revealed another face he was disappointing. Colleagues, friends, acquaintances, people whose opinion had once seemed vitally important. None of them mattered now. Only the small body in the hospital bed. Only the brown eyes that looked so much like his own. Only the mother who had raised his daughter alone for 5 years without once asking him for help. Until now. Until the situation became so desperate that pride no longer mattered. Everett pushed through the cathedral doors and into chaos. Cameras flashed immediately. Reporters shouted questions that blended into a wall of noise. Everett, what's happening? Is the wedding canceled? Where are you going? Was there an emergency? He didn't answer, didn't slow down. Scanned the street for his driver, found the black sedan waiting at the curb, and moved toward it with singular focus. Hands grabbed at his tuxedo jacket. Microphones thrust toward his face. Bodies blocked his path in the desperate choreography of paparazzi seeking the money shot. He pushed through all of it. His driver, Marcus, had the back door open before Everett reached the car. The man had worked for him for 3 years and knew when questions were unwelcome. City General Hospital, Everett said as he slid into the back seat. Fastest route. I don't care about traffic laws. Marcus nodded once and pulled into traffic before the door was fully closed. Through the tinted windows, Everett watched the cathedral recede. The crowd of guests spilling onto the steps. The photographers still snapping images of his departing vehicle. The news vans that would follow him if they could figure out his destination. He had just destroyed his own wedding in front of 300 witnesses and an unknown number of cameras. The consequences would be enormous. Career implications, relationship fallout, legal complications with the Monroe family, who did not handle public embarrassment gracefully. He should have been calculating damage control, drafting statements, calling lawyers. Instead, he was thinking about a little girl who didn't know his name, wondering what she liked to eat, what games she played, what stories she wanted at bedtime, wondering if he would get the chance to learn any of it. The sedan accelerated toward the hospital. Behind him, his old life crumbled into rubble. Ahead of him, a new life waited, terrifying and unknown and impossible to ignore. He had walked down that aisle alone. But he wasn't alone anymore. Somewhere in this city, he had a daughter. 2 daughters, and nothing else mattered until he knew they were safe. Let me pause here for a moment, because I know what some of you are thinking. I can almost see the comments forming in your minds. He did the right thing. Or maybe he's a monster for what he did to Clarissa. The truth is, there's no clean answer to what Everett Hale did in that cathedral. No verdict that satisfies everyone. No judgment that accounts for every variable. He abandoned his fiancée at the altar, left her standing in front of everyone she knew, humiliated beyond measure, destroyed months of planning, years of relationship building, a future they had constructed together piece by careful piece. That's real harm, real betrayal, real pain inflicted on a woman who had done nothing wrong. But he also ran toward a dying child, his child, a daughter he never knew existed, now fighting for her life in a hospital bed across the city. A little girl who might need his bone marrow to survive. Could he have waited, finished the vows, attended the reception, and then dealt with the emergency? Maybe. But would you have? Could you have stood at that altar, knowing your child was dying, and continued making promises about forever? I don't know the answer. I don't think Everett knew either. Sometimes life forces us into choices where every option causes damage, where there's no path that doesn't leave someone wounded, where the best we can do is pick which wound we can live with inflicting. So I'm asking you directly, do you think he made the right choice? Drop your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you think. Was Everett a hero for choosing his daughter? Or a villain for destroying Clarissa? Can someone be both at the same time? And here's the harder question. What would you have done? If your past showed up at the worst possible moment, if everything you'd built came crashing against everything you'd forgotten, which way would you walk? Take a second to hit that like button while you're thinking about it. Share this story with someone who might have a different answer than you do. Let's get a real conversation going in the comments. Because this story isn't just about Everett and Nadia and Clarissa. It's about all of us, the choices we make, the people we prioritize, the past we try to bury, and the presents that force those burials back open. We're only halfway through this journey. The consequences of Everett's choice are just beginning to unfold. The damage is going to spread in directions no one expected. And the question of whether love can survive this disaster, that answer is still waiting to be discovered. So stay with me. The hardest parts are still coming. Everett found her in the hospital cafeteria at 9:47 p.m. The fluorescent lighting cast everything in unflattering tones. The plastic chairs, the vending machines, the handful of exhausted families scattered across tables meant for quick meals and difficult conversations. Nadia sat alone in a corner, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She didn't look up when he approached. Didn't need to. She had always known when he entered a room, even before she saw his face. "Zoe's asleep again," she said quietly. "Maya is with my mother at the apartment. I should be there too, but I couldn't." She stopped, took a breath. "I couldn't go home yet." Everett pulled out the chair across from her, sat down slowly, as if sudden movements might shatter whatever fragile peace existed between them. "I got tested," he said, "for the bone marrow match. Results should come in 48 hours. Thank you." 2 words, spoken without looking at him, without the emotion that should accompany gratitude for potentially saving a child's life. But Everett understood. This wasn't about gratitude. This was about survival. Nadia had called him because she had no other choice, not because she wanted him back in her life. Every interaction between them was transactional, his bone marrow for Zoe's survival, nothing more. Except he wanted more. The realization had been growing since that first glimpse of Zoe in the hospital bed, since he had looked into eyes that mirrored his own and felt something shift in his chest, since he had watched Nadia navigate this nightmare with a strength that made his billion-dollar achievements feel trivial. He wanted to understand what had happened 6 years ago, why she had disappeared, why she had kept his daughters from him, what had gone so wrong that silence seemed preferable to sharing the truth. Nadia. She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, dark circles carved beneath them like permanent fixtures. She had aged since he last saw her, not badly, but noticeably. The carefree woman who had laughed in coffee shops and debated philosophy on apartment floors had been replaced by someone harder. Someone forged in fires he knew nothing about. "I need to understand," he said. "I need you to tell me what happened, why you left, why you never told me about the girls. Does it matter now?" "It matters to me." She studied him for a long moment, searching for something in his face. Judgment, perhaps, or accusation, or the cold calculation she had probably expected from the billionaire CEO who had replaced the struggling young man she once loved. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find something different. "Not here," she said finally. "Not in a cafeteria surrounded by strangers. If you want this conversation, it happens properly. Somewhere private. Name the place." "The chapel. This hospital has a chapel. It's empty this time of night." She stood without waiting for his agreement, walked toward the cafeteria exit with the automatic navigation of someone who had memorized every corner of this building over weeks of crisis. Everett followed. He would follow her anywhere right now. Follow her through explanations and accusations and whatever truth waited at the end of this conversation, because he was finally ready to hear it, even if it destroyed him. The chapel was small. 12 pews, a simple wooden cross, stained glass windows that caught nothing in the darkness outside. Candles flickered in a corner alcove, placed there by visitors seeking comfort in their own private desperation. Nadia sat in the front pew. Everett sat beside her, close enough to talk quietly, far enough to respect the distance years had built between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was weighted with too much history to be hostile. 6 years of separation, a relationship that had ended without closure, 2 children who represented everything they had created and everything they had lost. "I didn't know I was pregnant when I left," Nadia finally said. Her voice was soft, measured, as if she had rehearsed this explanation 1,000 times, waiting for an audience that never came. "I found out 2 months later. By then I had already moved, already started over, already convinced myself that leaving was the right choice." "Why did you leave?" She turned to face him. Her expression held no anger, just a sadness so deep it seemed bottomless. "Because I was disappearing, Everett. Every day you spent building that company, I lost another piece of myself. I would wait for you to come home, and you wouldn't. I would plan dinners, and you would cancel. I would try to tell you about my writing, and your eyes would glaze over because your mind was somewhere else. I was trying to build something." "I know." She cut him off gently. "I know what you were trying to build, and I supported it. For months I supported it. Told myself it was temporary. Told myself the man I loved was still in there, just buried under deadlines and investor meetings." She paused, looked at the cross hanging above them. "But then I realized something. I was becoming my mother." Everett frowned. "Your mother?" "She spent 30 years waiting for my father to prioritize her. 30 years of coming second to his job, his ambitions, his definition of success. She shrank herself to fit into the spaces he left for her, and by the time he retired, she didn't know who she was anymore." Nadia's voice cracked slightly. She steadied it with visible effort. "I watched that happen my entire childhood. I swore I would never let it happen to me. And then I realized it already was. I was waiting for you, Everett, shrinking myself to fit your schedule, losing my own dreams while you chased yours. So you left." "So I left. Not because I stopped loving you. Loving you was never the problem. I left because I was starting to hate myself for how much I was willing to sacrifice." The words hung in the candle-lit air. Everett absorbed them slowly, feeling each one land like a stone in still water. He had never seen it from her perspective, had never understood how his ambition, his desperate need to escape poverty, to build security, to become untouchable, had made her feel small, invisible, unimportant. He had been so focused on becoming someone that he had forgotten to be someone, to be present, to be the man she had fallen in love with in that coffee shop. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt inadequate, 2 syllables against years of neglect. But Nadia's expression softened slightly. Just a fraction, just enough to show that the apology had reached her. "I know," she said. "I think I've always known. You weren't cruel, Everett. You were just absent. And I needed someone present. Did you find that? Someone present?" She shook her head slowly. "No, I found something better. I found myself, raised 2 incredible girls, built a career writing the stories I always wanted to tell, became the person I was afraid I would lose if I stayed with you. You became the person you showed me once, in that apartment, when you told me the businessman was the costume and the writer was the real me." A sad smile crossed her face. "I remember. You were right, about everything. The businessman was a costume, still is. I've just been wearing it so long I forgot how to take it off. Maybe it's time to remember." Their eyes met, held. In the candlelight, Everett saw the woman he had loved 6 years ago, still there, still present, despite everything that had changed. And he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. "I should have fought for you." The admission emerged from somewhere Everett had kept locked for years. A place where regrets lived alongside the photograph in his desk drawer and the memories he refused to examine. "I should have noticed you pulling away. Should have asked what was wrong. Should have chosen you over the company at least sometimes." Nadia listened without interrupting. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers interlaced, posture open but guarded. "Instead," Everett continued, "I let you walk out the door, told myself it was temporary, that you would come back when you realized I was doing this for us, for our future. There was no us at that point," Nadia said quietly. "There was you, and there was me, existing in the same space but never actually together. I know that now. I didn't then. Would it have made a difference? If you had known?" The question stopped him, made him examine his own history with uncomfortable honesty. Would he have changed? Would he have chosen her over Harrison Webb's investment? Would he have walked away from the opportunity that became Hale Industries, the empire that made him a billionaire, the achievement that defined his entire adult identity? He wanted to say yes, wanted to believe he would have prioritized love over ambition. But the truth was more complicated. I don't know, he admitted. I was so scared back then. Scared of failing, scared of becoming my father, broken by circumstances, powerless against forces beyond my control. The company wasn't just about money, it was about survival, about never being vulnerable again. And I was a vulnerability. You were everything. That's what made you dangerous. Loving you meant needing you, and needing anyone felt like weakness. Nadia nodded slowly. Not forgiving, not condemning, simply understanding. So we both made choices, she said. Mine was to leave. Yours was to let me go. And here we are, 6 years later, meeting in a hospital chapel because our daughter is dying. Our daughter. The words still felt foreign on his tongue. Impossible and overwhelming and terrifying. Why didn't you tell me about the pregnancy? Nadia's expression shifted. Something complicated passed across her features. Guilt, defensiveness, pain, all tangled together. By the time I found out, I had convinced myself that leaving was permanent, that going back meant losing everything I had fought to reclaim. And I thought. She hesitated. I thought you wouldn't want them. Wouldn't want my own children? Wouldn't want the complication, the disruption to your plans. You were so focused on building your empire. What room was there for babies? For diapers and sleepless nights and all the chaos that comes with parenting? Everett wanted to argue, wanted to insist he would have made room, would have welcomed fatherhood. But he remembered who he was 6 years ago. The driven, obsessed, terrified young man who scheduled emotions and measured success in dollars. Would that man have embraced unexpected parenthood? Or would he have seen it as an obstacle? He couldn't answer honestly. And that uncertainty was its own kind of accountability. I denied you the choice, Nadia continued. I know that. I made a decision for both of us without consulting you, and I've questioned that decision every day since. Every day. Every time Maya asks about her father. Every time Zoe draws pictures of families with a daddy-shaped blank space. Every time I watch them wonder why other children have something they don't. Her voice broke slightly. She paused, collected herself. I told myself I was protecting them, protecting myself. But protection isn't the same as truth, and they deserved the truth. So did I. Yes, you did. And I'm sorry. The apology matched his own, inadequate against the weight of years lost. But it was real, honest, offered without excuse or deflection. Two people who had hurt each other. Two people who had made choices with consequences they couldn't foresee. Two people sitting in a chapel, finally speaking truths that should have been spoken long ago. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a beginning. Tell me about them, Everett said. Tell me about their birth, about who they are. Everything I missed. Nadia's face softened at the request. For the first time since the cathedral, something like warmth entered her expression. I was alone when they came, she began. My mother was supposed to be there, but the girls decided to arrive 3 weeks early. She was still on a plane from Atlanta when the contractions started. She smiled faintly at the memory. I drove myself to the hospital. Probably shouldn't have. The nurses were horrified when I walked through the doors already in active labor. But I was stubborn. Still am. That hasn't changed. No, that hasn't changed. She settled back against the pew, eyes distant, traveling to a moment 5 years gone. Maya came first, 7 minutes ahead of her sister, and she's never let Zoe forget it. Even in the womb, she was the leader, pushed her way out like she had somewhere important to be. And Zoe took her time. The doctors started worrying, her heart rate dipped, and suddenly there were extra people in the room, extra machines, everyone moving with that urgent calm that means something might be wrong. Nadia's voice tightened slightly. For about 4 minutes I thought I might lose her. Before I even got to meet her, before I knew her name or her face or anything about who she would become. But she made it. She made it. Came out screaming like she was furious at the world for rushing her. 5 pounds, 3 ounces. Smaller than her sister, but louder. So much louder. She laughed softly. A sound Everett hadn't heard in 6 years but recognized instantly. They were so different from the beginning. Maya was observant, quiet. She would study everything with these intense eyes, like she was cataloging the world for future reference. Zoe was all emotion, laughing or crying or screaming, nothing in between. You always knew exactly how she felt. Like you, Everett said. Nadia looked at him. What? You were like that, are like that. Everything you feel shows on your face. It's one of the things I loved about you. No masks, no pretense. Something flickered in her eyes. She looked away quickly. Maya has your focus, she said, redirecting. That intensity when she concentrates on something. She can spend hours building things, blocks, puzzles, elaborate structures that make no sense to anyone but her. And then she explains them, and suddenly you see the logic you missed. She sounds incredible. She is. They both are. Nadia pulled out her phone, scrolled through photos, handed it to Everett. He found himself looking at a gallery of moments he had never witnessed. Birthday parties with homemade cakes, beach trips with sandy smiles, Halloween costumes, a princess and a dinosaur refusing to coordinate, first days of school with matching backpacks and anxious expressions. His daughters, growing up in photographs while he built an empire that suddenly felt meaningless. That one's my favorite. Nadia pointed to a picture of both girls asleep on a couch. Maya curled protectively around her sister, Zoe's head resting on Maya's shoulder. Their faces peaceful, unguarded, full of trust that the world was safe because they had each other. This was about 6 months ago, before the diagnosis, before everything changed. Everett stared at the image. 2 small bodies intertwined, 2 lives he had created and never known, 2 daughters who had lived and grown and bonded without any awareness that their father existed. A single tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. He wiped it away quickly. Old habits. The billionaire couldn't cry in public, couldn't show weakness, couldn't reveal the soft places beneath the armor. But Nadia had seen. Of course she had seen. They're going to love you, she said softly, when they're ready. When all of this is over and Zoe is healthy again, they're going to want to know their father. What if I don't know how to be one? Nobody does. You learn, you mess up, you try again. That's all parenting is, showing up and trying again. I'm good at showing up when it matters. I'm terrible at the everyday. Then maybe it's time to change that. The chapel fell silent. Candles flickered. The cross watched over 2 people rebuilding something from ruins. Everett looked at the photograph one more time, memorized every detail. Then he handed the phone back. I want to meet Maya, he said. When Zoe is stronger, when the timing is right. I want to meet both of them properly. Not as a stranger in a hospital room. As their father. Nadia nodded slowly. We'll get there. 1 step at a time. 1 step at a time. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, wasn't an offer of restored love, but it was a path forward, and for now, that was enough. They walked back to the pediatric ICU together, not touching, not speaking, but moving in tandem, their footsteps synchronized in a way that felt both strange and familiar. The hallway was quieter now. Late-night stillness had settled over the hospital. Fewer nurses at stations, fewer families in waiting rooms. The machines continued their electronic vigils, but the human drama had dimmed to a murmur. Outside room 412, Nadia paused. Do you want to see her again? She'll be asleep, but... Yes. No hesitation, no calculation, just the simple, overwhelming need to look at his daughter's face. Nadia opened the door softly, led him inside. Zoe lay exactly as she had before. Small body swallowed by hospital bed. Tubes and wires connecting her to machines that tracked every breath. But something had changed in how Everett saw her. Before, she had been a shock, a disruption, a fact his mind couldn't process. Now, she was his daughter. He moved closer, pulled a chair beside her bed, sat down and simply watched her sleep. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. Her small hand lay palm up on the blanket, fingers slightly curled. A children's book rested on the bedside table, The Velveteen Rabbit, worn from many readings. She loves that story, Nadia whispered from the doorway, asks for it every night. Something about things becoming real through love. Real isn't how you are made. It's a thing that happens to you. Everett remembered the book from his own childhood. His mother had read it to him during one of those dark periods when the electricity was off and candles provided the only light. She had turned it into an adventure, just like she turned everything into an adventure, making things real through love. He had spent his entire adult life trying to become real through achievement, through wealth, through the construction of an identity so solid that nothing could shake it. But sitting here, watching his daughter breathe, he understood what the rabbit in the story had always known. You didn't become real by building walls. You became real by letting someone in. Everett reached out slowly, carefully, placed his hand near Zoe's on the blanket. Not touching, he didn't want to wake her, but close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her small body. "I'm here," he whispered, so quietly that only he could hear. "I'm sorry I wasn't here before, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The promise felt different from the ones he had been about to make at the altar. Those vows had been about obligation, about contracts and commitments and the public performance of devotion. This promise was about something else entirely. This was about showing up, day after day, learning who this small person was, making up for 5 years of absence with whatever time remained. This was about becoming real. Nadia watched from the doorway. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything. She had spent 5 years protecting these girls alone, carrying every burden, making every decision, shouldering every fear without anyone to share the weight. Now, for the first time, someone else was in the room, someone who wanted to help carry. Whether that someone would prove reliable, whether Everett could actually transform into the father he was promising to become, that remained to be seen. But the intention was there, the commitment was there. The honesty that had been missing for 6 years was finally, tentatively returning. Love returns through honesty. That was the lesson of this night, the lesson of this chapel conversation and this bedside vigil and this slow, painful reunion of two people who had hurt each other without meaning to. You couldn't love fully while hiding behind masks. You couldn't connect genuinely while keeping parts of yourself locked away. You couldn't become real while pretending to be someone else. Everett had spent years constructing a version of himself designed for public consumption. The billionaire, the CEO, the philanthropist, the success story. All of it true, none of it complete. The complete truth included a poet who had been buried beneath business plans, a lover who had been too scared to prioritize connection, a man who had run from vulnerability so hard that he'd run straight into a life that looked perfect and felt empty. And now, a father who was terrified and uncertain and completely unprepared, but present, finally, fully present. Zoe stirred slightly in her sleep, made a small sound, settled again. Everett didn't move, would sit here all night if they let him, would sit here until the test results came back and they knew whether his bone marrow could save her life, would sit here as long as his daughter needed him, because that was what fathers did. That was what becoming real required. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Everett Hale wasn't running from anything. He was finally running towards something that mattered. The bone marrow test results arrived on a Tuesday morning. Everett sat in Dr. Patricia Chen's office, still wearing clothes. From the night before, he had barely left the hospital in 3 days. His phone showed 247 unread emails, 89 missed calls, and a stock price that had dropped 14% since the wedding disaster. None of it mattered. "You're a match," Dr. Chen said, sliding a folder across her desk. "Not perfect, but close enough. We can proceed with the transplant." Relief crashed over him like a wave breaking against rocks. His hands trembled as he picked up the folder, staring at numbers and medical terminology he barely understood. "When can we do it?" "We'll need to prepare both you and Zoe. The harvesting procedure for you is scheduled for next week. Her conditioning treatment starts in 3 days. If everything goes according to plan, the transplant itself happens in about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days. An eternity when your daughter's life hung in the balance, and simultaneously no time at all to learn how to be a father. What are her chances?" Dr. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral. "With a matched donor, pediatric leukemia patients have a 60 to 70% 5-year survival rate. Zoe is young and otherwise healthy. Those are good odds. 60 to 70%. In business, those numbers would represent an acceptable risk, a reasonable bet. But this wasn't business. This was his daughter. Everett thanked the doctor and walked back to room 412 on autopilot. His mind was racing through calculations that had nothing to do with spreadsheets. How to tell Zoe she would need more treatment. How to support Nadia through the coming weeks. How to be present for a child he was only beginning to know. He had built a billion-dollar company from nothing. This felt infinitely harder. Nadia was in the room when he arrived, reading aloud from the Velveteen Rabbit, while Zoe listened with heavy-lidded eyes. The scene stopped him in the doorway. This intimate ritual he had never witnessed, this bond he had no part in. How did you enter a story already in progress? How did you become relevant to people who had survived perfectly well without you? Nadia noticed him, paused mid-sentence. News? I'm a match. Zoe perked up slightly. What's a match? Nadia glanced at Everett, a question in her eyes. How much should they tell her? How much could a 5-year-old understand? It means, Everett said slowly, moving into the room, that I have something inside me that might help you get better. The doctors are going to take a little bit from me and give it to you. Zoe considered this information with the gravity only children could bring to medical explanations. Does it hurt? Maybe a little. But it's worth it. Why? Because helping you is the most important thing I've ever done. The words came out before he could filter them. Raw, honest, completely unprepared. Zoe studied his face with those familiar brown eyes. Nadia's eyes, his mother, his cheekbones, a combination of genetics he was only beginning to trace. Are you my daddy? The question landed like a thunderbolt. Everett looked at Nadia. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Permission granted. Yes, he said, I'm your daddy. Where were you before? The hardest question, the one he had been dreading since he first saw her small body in this hospital bed. I didn't know you existed, he said carefully. Your mommy and I, we lost each other for a while, but I'm here now, and I'm going to stay. Zoe absorbed this. Her brow furrowed in thought, his expression, he realized. The same face he made when processing complex information. Okay, she finally said. Can you read the rabbit book? Mommy's voice is getting tired. Just like that. No interrogation, no demands for explanation, just the simple acceptance that children offered when adults overcomplicated everything. Everett took the book from Nadia's hands, sat in the chair beside the bed, found the place she had marked with her finger, and read to his daughter for the first time. The days that followed taught Everett things no business school had ever covered. He learned that 5-year-olds asked approximately 400 questions per hour. Why is the sky blue? Why do nurses wear those shoes? Why does medicine taste bad if it's supposed to help? Why do you have blue eyes when mommy has brown ones? He learned that there was no correct answer to why, only the willingness to keep engaging until the questions stopped or the child fell asleep. He learned that hospital food was universally terrible, but Zoe would eat anything if he pretended it was dragon food or princess potions or secret fuel for superheroes. He learned that her favorite color was purple, but specifically the purple in butterfly wings, not the purple in grapes. He learned that she wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, but only for baby animals because the big ones are scary. He learned that she slept with a stuffed elephant named Professor Peanut, who had been with her since birth. He learned that she cried at night when she thought no one was listening. That lesson came at 2 a.m. on his 4th night sleeping in the hospital. He had taken to staying in the recliner beside her bed, unable to leave, unwilling to miss a single moment. The sound was small, muffled, the crying of someone trying desperately not to be heard. Zoe, she froze, pretended to be asleep. I know you're awake, sweetheart. It's okay to be scared. Silence, then a tiny voice. I don't want to be sick anymore. Everett moved from the recliner to the edge of her bed, took her small hand in his. I know, and you won't be sick forever. The doctors are going to help you get better. But it hurts. The medicine makes me feel bad. I know it does, and I wish I could take that away. I wish I could be sick instead of you. She looked at him with wet eyes. You'd do that? In a heartbeat. What's a heartbeat? Even through tears, the questions continued. Everett found himself smiling despite the weight of the moment. It's... He placed her hand against his chest. Feel that? That's my heart beating. It's what keeps me alive. And I would give you every single one of my heartbeats if it would make you better. Zoe was quiet for a moment, feeling the rhythm beneath her palm. Your heart is fast. That's because I'm talking to you. You make my heart happy. She smiled. Small, but real. Daddy. The word still sent electricity through his chest every time she used it. Yes. Will you stay until I fall asleep? I'll stay all night. Promise? Promise. He didn't sleep that night. Sat beside her bed, holding her hand, watching her breathe, learning what presence actually meant. It wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts or the trappings of wealth that had defined his adult life. It wasn't about fixing problems with money or solving crises with strategy. It was about being there, simply, consistently, reliably there. For the first time, Everett understood why his mother had called lighting candles during blackouts an adventure, why she had ironed her uniform at midnight without complaint, why she had sold her wedding ring without ever mentioning the sacrifice. Love wasn't about what you gave. It was about showing up when it mattered, night after night, question after question, moment after moment. He had spent his entire life running toward achievements. Now he was learning to stay still. Trust, Everett discovered, could not be rebuilt with apologies. Only actions counted, only consistency, only the daily accumulation of moments where he showed up, followed through, and proved that his presence wasn't temporary. Nadia watched him like someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. She had every reason to distrust him. He had chosen his company over her 6 years ago, had let her walk away without fighting, had become a billionaire while she raised their daughters alone, working 3 jobs before her writing career finally stabilized. His sudden transformation from absent stranger to devoted father must have seemed suspicious. Too easy. Too convenient. "You don't have to prove anything," she said one afternoon, finding him reorganizing Zoe's get-well cards by color, because Zoe had requested a rainbow wall. "I'm not proving anything. I'm making a rainbow wall. You know what I mean." He set down the cards, met her eyes. "I know you're waiting for me to leave, to get bored, to realize that fatherhood is harder than running a company and retreat back to my comfortable life." Nadia didn't deny it. "I can't promise you I'll be perfect," he continued. "I'll make mistakes, probably a lot of them, but I can promise you I'm not leaving. Not this time, not ever again. Words are easy, Everett. Then watch my actions." She held his gaze for a long moment, searching for cracks in his sincerity, finding none, or at least none she could identify. "Maya is coming to visit tomorrow," she finally said. "She's nervous about meeting you." "She's nervous?" "She's 5. She's heard about you for the first time this week. Her entire understanding of Daddy comes from other kids' families and questions I couldn't answer. So yes, she's nervous." "What did you tell her about me?" "The truth, that you didn't know about her, that you came as soon as you found out, that you're trying to learn how to be a father." "That's generous." "It's accurate." Everett nodded slowly. "What should I know about her? Before tomorrow?" The question seemed to surprise Nadia. Her expression softened slightly. "She's quieter than Zoe. Takes longer to warm up to people. She'll probably observe you for a while before engaging. Don't push." "What is she like?" "Building things, puzzles, anything with patterns or structures. She's been constructing elaborate cities with blocks since she was 3. Like me." The recognition warmed something in his chest. "I used to build things constantly as a kid, anything I could get my hands on." "I know. I remember you telling me." "You remember that?" "I remember everything you told me, Everett. Every story, every fear, every dream you shared during those months we were together." She paused. "That's what made it so hard, when you stopped sharing." The words hung between them, an acknowledgement of what had been lost, what might possibly be recovered. "I want to share again," he said quietly, "not just with the girls, with you. If you'll let me, I don't know what I'm willing to let, not yet." "That's fair, but I'm willing to try, for their sake, and maybe," she hesitated, "maybe for mine too." It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it was an open door, and Everett had spent too many years ignoring open doors to make that mistake again. Maya arrived at the hospital, clutching a handmade card and hiding behind her grandmother's legs. She was Zoe's mirror and opposite. Same face, same features, but where Zoe was energy and noise, Maya was stillness and observation. Her eyes tracked Everett's every movement with an intensity that reminded him of investors assessing risk. "Hi, Maya." He crouched to her level, keeping distance, remembering Nadia's advice. "I'm really happy to meet you." She didn't respond, just watched. "Your sister has been telling me about you. She says you're the best builder she knows." A tiny flicker of interest. Maya's grip on her grandmother's leg loosened slightly. "I used to love building things too," Everett continued. "When I was your age, I would construct towers out of anything I could find. Books, boxes, cushions." "Cushions fall down," Maya said, her first words to him. "They do. That's what makes it challenging." She considered this. Then, without ceremony, walked past him to her sister's bed. Zoe immediately demanded to see the card. Maya produced it with careful pride, a drawing of two girls holding hands, surrounded by purple flowers. "That's us," Zoe explained to Everett. "Maya always draws us together. It's beautiful." Maya glanced at him, still assessing, but the hostility had faded into something more like curiosity. Over the following days, Everett learned that winning Maya's trust required patience he had never practiced in business. He couldn't acquire her affection with money or convince her with rhetoric. She responded only to consistency, to showing up day after day without agenda or expectation. He brought her building materials. Not expensive toys, she seemed unimpressed by price tags, but interesting objects. Cardboard tubes from paper towel rolls, wooden blocks in unusual shapes, connectors he found at hardware stores that linked things together in unexpected ways. She accepted each offering silently, studied it, eventually incorporated it into whatever structure she was creating. One afternoon she handed him a block. "You can help, but only if you do it right." The invitation felt like winning a Nobel Prize. He sat on the hospital floor beside her, taking direction on where each piece should go, learning her logic as she explained why certain configurations worked and others didn't. "This one goes here because it's heavier," she said, pointing to a specific location. "Heavy on the bottom makes everything stay. Good foundation." "What's foundation?" "The strong part underneath that holds everything else up." She nodded seriously, added the word to her vocabulary without missing a beat. Nadia watched these interactions from doorways and corners, never interrupting, never inserting herself. But Everett caught her expressions sometimes, surprise, warmth, something that might have been hope. The romance, when it began rekindling, happened in moments so small he almost missed them. A brush of fingers when she handed him coffee. Eye contact that lasted a second longer than necessary. The way she laughed at his terrible dad jokes. Genuine laughter, not polite tolerance. One evening, after both girls had fallen asleep, they sat together in the hallway outside the room. "You're different," Nadia said quietly. "Am the first. The Everett I knew 6 years ago would have hired someone to handle this, would have thrown money at the problem and maintained his distance. You would have been generous but absent. That Everett was an idiot. That Everett was scared. Still am, terrified actually, every single day. Of what? Of failing them, of proving that you were right to leave, of being the father my own father became, present physically but gone everywhere else." Nadia was quiet for a moment. "You're not that person," she said finally. "I'm not sure you ever were. I think you just convinced yourself you had to be. And now you're becoming someone new, someone I didn't expect." She looked at him directly, in the hospital's harsh lighting, with exhaustion written across both. Their faces, something passed between them that felt like possibility. "I don't want to rush anything," she said. "We have history. We have hurt. And we have 2 daughters who need stability more than they need their parents' romantic drama." "Agreed. But I'm not ruling anything out. For the first time in 6 years, I'm not ruling you out." It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it was enough. More than enough. Everett had learned, finally, that grand gestures meant nothing. The real work happened in the quiet moments, in showing up when it wasn't convenient, in choosing presence over productivity, in building trust one block at a time, like his daughter constructing towers on the hospital floor. Small moments, accumulated daily, compounding over weeks and months. That was how you rebuilt what had been broken. That was how love returned. Let me pause here for a moment to say something important. The story you're watching right now, Everett and Nadia's journey, isn't just entertainment. It carries something deeper, a message that might matter to someone in your life. We all know people who have been absent, fathers who chose work over family, mothers who got lost in their own struggles, partners who promised presence but delivered distance. And we all know people on the other side too, people waiting for someone who never shows up, children drawing families with blank spaces where parents should be, hearts hoping for change that never arrives. This story is about the possibility of transformation, not easy transformation, not instant redemption, not the fairy tale version where apologies fix everything and love conquers all. Real transformation, the kind that takes time, the kind that requires daily choices, the kind that fails and tries again and fails again until eventually, maybe, something real starts growing. Everett Hale walked out of his wedding for a daughter he never knew existed. He could have written a check and returned to his comfortable life. He could have treated fatherhood as another item on his agenda, scheduled between board meetings. Instead, he sat on a hospital floor building towers with blocks. He read bedtime stories until his voice gave out. He learned his daughter's favorite colors and biggest fears and silliest dreams. He became present. Someone you know needs to hear this story. Maybe it's a parent struggling to connect with their kids. Maybe it's a friend who gave up on someone they loved. Maybe it's someone who believes they've missed their chance, that the damage is done, the time is lost, the relationship is beyond repair. This story says otherwise. It says, you can start over, you can show up, you can become the person you should have been all along. It won't be easy. It won't happen overnight. And some damage might never fully heal. But the attempt matters. The trying matters. The daily choice to be present matters. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Share this video with someone who needs it. Send it to a friend. Post it on your social media. Put it in a family group chat where difficult conversations have been avoided for too long. Not because I need the views, though of course I appreciate them. Because this story might unlock something in someone else's heart. It might give them permission to try again. It might help them believe that transformation is possible. The comments on this video are already filling with people sharing their own experiences. Fathers reconnecting with estranged children. Couples rebuilding after years apart. People finally understanding what presence actually means. Your story might be the one that reaches someone at exactly the right moment. So share, comment, engage, not just for the algorithm, for the human being who might need exactly what this story offers. Now, let me tell you what happened next. Because the journey wasn't over, the transplant was still coming. And Clarissa Monroe was about to remind everyone that damage has consequences. The transplant happened on a Thursday. Everett lay in a hospital bed adjacent to his daughter's room, watching his bone. Marrow flowed through tubes toward the child he had only known for 3 weeks. The procedure was uncomfortable, deep aching in his hips where they had extracted the marrow, but the discomfort felt like a gift. Finally, something he could give her. Something tangible. Something his body could offer that his absence had denied for 5 years. The waiting began.